Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Samuel Ironforge, and I've been protecting these mountains for 22 years. Never thought I'd be telling this story to anyone, but after what happened up at Grandfather Mountain, I figure people need to know. Some things should stay buried, but when they don't, someone's got to speak up. I work for the National Park Service, specializing in historic site preservation. Sounds boring, right? Most days it is. I catalog Cherokee artifacts, maintain burial sites, and keep treasure hunters from digging where they shouldn't. The Cherokee call me a friend, which means something around here. My great-great-grandfather fought in these mountains back in the 1780s, but that's a story for another time. March 26, 1976 started like any other day. Spring thaw was making the trails muddy, and I had flash flood warnings on my radio. I was heading up to check on the old Cherokee ceremonial site near Grandfather Mountain, 26 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a single mountain road that washes out every heavy rain. The site's special. Ancient burial mounds dot the area, along with stone circles the Cherokee used for ceremonies hundreds of years ago. It's also where my ancestor and the Cherokee made their last stand against each other in 1782. Blood soaked into this ground long before I was born. I never believed the Cherokee stories about sleeping giants under the mountains. Joseph Standing Bear, an elder from the Eastern Band, used to tell me tales about stone guardians that protected sacred places. "Some things sleep until they're awakened, Sam," he'd say. "Better to let them rest." Old man talk, I thought. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the wind had stopped. 22 years in these mountains, and I'd never heard such complete quiet. It felt wrong, like the forest was holding its breath. Then I saw the archaeological team's camp. 5 tents were still standing, but they were empty. Equipment scattered everywhere. Brushes, measuring tools, cameras lying in the mud. Dr. Sarah Chen from the university had permits to study the main burial mound. I'd talked to her just 3 days earlier. Smart woman, careful worker. She wouldn't just abandon her gear. I found them inside the burial mound. The ancient earthwork had collapsed inward, creating a crater about 15 feet across. At the bottom, I could see what was left of the 5-person team. I say what was left because their bones had been crushed to powder. Not broken, pulverized, like something had ground them up with tremendous pressure. But that wasn't the strangest part. Cherokee artifacts were arranged around the bodies in a perfect circle. Arrowheads, pottery shards, carved bone tools, items that should have been scattered throughout the mound, not placed in a deliberate pattern. The arrangement looked like a warning sign, though I couldn't read the message. I radioed for backup, but the static was so bad I could barely hear dispatch. Mountains interfere with radio signals, but this was different. It sounded like something was jamming the frequency on purpose. That's when I noticed the ground under my feet was warm. March in North Carolina can be cold, especially at this elevation, but the earth around the collapsed mound felt heated, like something was generating warmth from deep underground. I knelt and pressed my palm to the soil. It was definitely warm, and I could swear I felt a slow, steady pulse, like a massive heartbeat. The Cherokee warning totems started bleeding. These were wooden posts the tribe had placed around sacred sites, carved with symbols that meant, "Do not disturb." I'd seen them hundreds of times, weathered gray wood standing sentinel over burial grounds. But now, dark. Red sap was oozing from the carved symbols running down the posts like blood. My metal detector started going crazy. I always carry one to check for buried artifacts before any digging. The needle was spinning wildly, registering massive metallic content somewhere deep beneath the mound, but it wasn't pointing in different directions like it would for scattered objects. The needle pointed straight down, suggesting something huge and metallic was buried directly below. As I stood there trying to make sense of it all, I heard Tom Whitfield's voice on the radio. "Sam, you up at the ceremonial site?" Static filled the channel, but I could make out his words. Tom was my partner. a good ranger with 15 years' experience. Got a call about missing archaeologists. Need backup? Tom, stay away from here, I said into the radio. Something's not right. The whole team is dead, and... The radio went silent. Then I heard Tom's voice again, but it was different, distant, like an echo. Sam, I can see you up there. I'm coming up the trail. I looked down the mountain path. No sign of Tom's truck. No movement at all. But his voice had sounded close, like he was right beside me. Tom, where are you? I called into the radio. I don't see your vehicle. No answer, just static that almost sounded like breathing. That's when the ground beneath the burial mound started to bulge upward. I watched the earth rise like something was pushing up from underneath. The bulge grew slowly at first, then faster, until it was 3 feet high and growing. Cracks appeared around the edges, spider webbing out in perfect geometric patterns. The warmth in the ground increased. Now it felt hot, like standing over a furnace. Steam began rising from the cracks, carrying a smell I'll never forget. Metallic blood mixed with ancient earth and something else. Something that had been buried for centuries. My compass needle started pointing down instead of north. I've used the same compass for 15 years, never failed me once. But now the needle swung in a complete circle before settling in. One position, straight down toward the center of the burial mound. It was like something with tremendous magnetic power was pulling it from deep underground. That's when I heard the Cherokee elder's voice behind me. You need to leave this place, Sam Ironforge. I spun around. Joseph Standing Bear stood at the edge of the site, but something was wrong with how he looked. The old man seemed transparent, like morning mist with sunlight behind it. His eyes were solid black, no whites showing. Joseph, how did you get up here so fast? I've been here much longer than you know. His voice sounded like wind through dry leaves. Your people broke a sacred promise. Now the guardian wakes. What guardian? Joseph, we need to get help. 5 people are dead down there. The elder pointed to the rising mound. 5 more will join them unless you understand what your ancestor did in 1782. My blood went cold. What are you talking about? Samuel Ironforge fought Cherokee warriors here. But he also made a deal with our shaman. The stone guardian would sleep as long as sacred places remained untouched. Your great-great-grandfather signed the treaty in his own blood. I felt dizzy. That's impossible. I would have found records. Look in your jacket pocket. With shaking hands, I reached into my field jacket. My fingers found a folded paper I'd never put there. The parchment was old, yellowed with age. When I unfolded it, I saw familiar handwriting. My own handwriting. But the ink was brown with age. Treaty of the Stone Guardian, March 26, 1782. I, Samuel Ironforge, do swear by my blood that the sacred burial places of the Cherokee Nation shall remain untouched. In return, the Stone Guardian will sleep beneath the earth. Should this promise be broken, the Guardian will wake to reclaim what was disturbed. Signed in blood, Samuel Ironforge. The signature was in my handwriting, but the paper was nearly 200 years old. How is this possible? I whispered. Time moves differently when dealing with ancient powers, Joseph said. Your ancestor's spirit has been bound to this place, just like the Guardian. The archaeologists broke the treaty. Now the debt must be paid. The ground exploded upward. A massive stone hand thrust up from the burial mound, fingers spread wide, each one as thick as a tree trunk. The hand was carved from Blue Ridge granite, but it moved like living flesh. Ancient Cherokee war paint was etched into the stone, glowing red-hot like coals. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. The hand rotated slowly, then pressed its palm flat against the ground. The earth shook as something enormous pushed itself upward. Tom! I yelled into the radio. Stay away from the site! Do not come up here! Static answered me. Then Tom's voice, but it was wrong. Too calm, too distant. I can see it, Sam. It's beautiful. A second stone hand burst through the earth, then a head the size of a car, carved from the same red-streaked granite. Eyes like burning coals opened and looked directly at me. The stone giant's face was human but ancient, with Cherokee tattoos carved into its cheeks and forehead. The entity rose to its full height, 30 feet of living stone, war paint glowing like fire. Its body was covered in symbols I recognized from Cherokee artifacts, but these were moving, shifting position on the granite skin like living tattoos. It spoke in a voice like grinding mountains. Who disturbed the sacred places? I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The fear was so intense it felt like ice water in my veins. This was real. This impossible, ancient thing was standing in front of me, and it wanted answers. The archaeologists, I managed to say. They're dead now. They were first. More will follow until the debt is paid. The giant took a step toward me, and the ground shook like an earthquake. Trees fell in its path, crushed under massive stone feet. I could feel heat radiating from its body, hot enough to make the air shimmer. That's when I heard Tom screaming. His voice came from the direction of the mountain trail, but it was filled with terror and pain. The screaming went on for what felt like forever, then cut off abruptly. "Tom!" I ran toward the trail, my legs shaky with fear. I found his truck first, or what was left of it. The vehicle had been crushed flat, metal twisted into impossible shapes. Tom was underneath, but like the archaeologists, his bones had been ground to powder. But his radio was still working, crackling with static. Then I heard his voice again. "Sam, it's so beautiful up here. You should come see." My partner was dead, but somehow his voice was still talking to me through the radio, and it was trying to lure me somewhere. I looked back at the burial site. The stone giant was walking away from me, heading down the mountain toward the valley, toward town. Each step caused landslides, trees falling like dominoes in its wake. The Cherokee elder appeared beside me again, still transparent, still with those solid black eyes. "It will not stop until the sacred places are made whole again," he said, "or until someone pays the blood debt your ancestor promised." "How do I stop it?" "The same way it was bound before. Cherokee peace offering, sacred tobacco, and the blood of Samuel Ironforge." I stared at the ancient treaty in my hands, the brown ink that looked like old blood. "You mean I have to die?" "Perhaps. Or perhaps find another way to honor the promise. But decide quickly, Sam Ironforge. The guardian grows stronger with each step toward the living." The stone giant was already half a mile down the mountain, leaving a path of destruction 30 feet wide. At this rate, it would reach the town in less than an hour. And somehow Tom's voice was still calling to me through the radio, trying to lead me into the same trap that had keyed him. I had to get to town before the giant did. My truck started on the third try, engine reluctant in the cold mountain air. As I drove down the winding road, I could see the giant's path of destruction paralleling mine through the forest. Trees lay scattered like toothpicks, and the sound of grinding stone echoed between the mountains. Tom's voice kept calling through the radio. "Sam, I'm waiting for you at Miller's Creek Bridge. The giant showed me something amazing. You need to see this." Miller's Creek Bridge was on the main road to town. If Tom, or whatever was using Tom's voice, could lure me there, I'd be trapped. But I needed to know what I was dealing with. I parked a quarter mile from the bridge and approached on foot. The stone giant had passed this way recently. The creek was running red with iron deposits stirred up from the riverbed, and the air still shimmered with residual heat. Tom's body was there, arranged like the archaeologists had been. Bones crushed to powder, but positioned in a ceremonial circle with Cherokee artifacts. His radio sat in the center, still crackling with static. Then I heard my own voice coming through the speaker. "Tom, where are you? I don't see your vehicle." It was exactly what I'd said on the radio earlier. The thing was replaying our conversation, but backwards, learning how to use our voices against us. I grabbed the radio and ran back to my truck. The giant's trail led straight toward Highway 221, the main route into town. At its current pace, it would be there in 30 minutes. I had to warn people, but my radio wasn't getting through. Every channel was filled with the same static, and occasionally the voices of the dead trying to lure me back. That's when I remembered Joseph Standing Bear's words about sacred tobacco and Cherokee peace offerings. The Eastern Band Cherokee Nation had a community center in town. If I could find Joseph, the real Joseph, not the spirit that had appeared at the burial site, maybe he could tell me how to perform the ritual properly. I drove as fast as I dared on the winding mountain roads. Behind me, the sound of the giant's footsteps was getting closer. Each step sent vibrations through the ground that I could feel in my truck's steering wheel. Town came into view just as the sun was setting. Cherokee, North Carolina was a small place, maybe 3,000 people if you counted the surrounding farms. Most of them had no idea what was heading their way. I pulled up to the community center and ran inside. A few Cherokee families were having dinner together, kids playing in the corner. When they saw me, covered in mud and wild-eyed, they knew something was wrong. "I need to find Joseph Standing Bear," I said. "It's an emergency." An older woman pointed toward the back of the building. "He's in the ceremonial room, preparing for tonight's prayers." "But Sam, you look like you've seen a ghost." If only it were that simple. I found Joseph in a small room lined with traditional Cherokee artifacts. He was burning sage and speaking in Cherokee, but when he saw me, his eyes went wide with fear. "You're the ranger from the mountain," he said, "and you've awakened something that should have stayed sleeping. Joseph, I need your help. There's a stone giant heading for town. People are going to die unless I can stop it." The old man studied my face carefully. "Tell me exactly what happened." I showed him the ancient treaty with my handwriting, told him about the archaeologists, the burial mound, everything. As I spoke, his expression grew more grave. "The Nunahai," he whispered. "Stone people, guardians of sacred places. Your ancestor made a binding promise, sealed in blood. When the archaeologists disturbed the burial mound, they broke the treaty. Can you help me stop it? The ceremony requires specific items: sacred tobacco, blessed by our ancestors, spring water from the burial site, and..." He hesitated. "And what?" "Blood from the Twitchin. Edie Signer. Your blood, Sam. The Guardian won't accept the offering from anyone else." The ground shook. Through the window, I could see trees falling on the mountainside above town. The giant was less than a mile away. "How much blood?" I asked. "Enough to show true sacrifice. Not necessarily death, but significant." Joseph gathered the sacred items while I tried to think. The treaty said the Guardian would sleep if sacred places remained untouched, but it was too late for that. The archaeologists had already disturbed the burial mound. Now I had to find another way to honor the agreement. "Joseph, what if we made the burial site sacred again, fixed what was disturbed?" The old man paused in his preparations. "It might work, but you'd have to return the artifacts to exactly where they were found, repair the burial mound, and offer your blood to seal the new promise." "But the site is destroyed. How can I—" The building shook as the giant's footsteps came closer. Through the window, I could see its massive form emerging from the tree line. 30 feet of living stone, war paint glowing like fire in the darkness. People were starting to notice. Car alarms went off as the vibrations set them off. Dogs howled throughout the town. Someone screamed. "There's no time to go back to the burial site," I said. "It has to be here." Joseph's eyes lit up with understanding. "The artifacts, the ones arranged around the bodies. Do you have them?" I'd collected the Cherokee items as evidence following standard procedure. They were in evidence bags in my truck. Arrowheads, pottery shards, carved bone tools. The same items the giant had arranged in warning circles. "I have them, but how does that help?" "If we can create a sacred circle here, in the center of town, and you offer your blood while returning the artifacts to Cherokee care, it might satisfy the treaty terms." The giant was now visible to everyone in town. Its burning eyes swept back and forth as it looked for something. When its gaze fell on the community center, those coal fire eyes locked onto mine, through the window. It knew I was here. "It's time to pay the debt, Samuel Ironforge." The voice was so loud it shattered windows throughout the building. Children were crying, adults screaming and running for their cars. But there was nowhere to run. The giant was blocking the main road out of town. Joseph, we have to do this now. The old man nodded grimly. Outside, in the parking lot, I'll create the sacred circle. We ran outside with the ceremonial items. Behind us, families huddled together, watching in terror as the impossible stone giant approached their town. Some people were trying to drive away, but the giant's footsteps had cracked the road in several places, making escape impossible. Joseph began arranging the artifacts in a traditional Cherokee pattern while chanting in his native language. I could smell the sacred tobacco burning, see the blessed spring water reflecting the giant's fiery glow. The stone guardian stopped 50 feet away from us. This close, I could see the intricate details carved into its granite skin. Battle scenes from Cherokee history, symbols of protection and vengeance, all moving and shifting like living tattoos. Samuel Ironforge, your ancestors' promise has been broken. I know, I called back, my voice barely audible over the sound of grinding stone. I'm here to make it right. The sacred places were disturbed. The dead were scattered. Blood must pay for blood. Joseph finished the ceremonial circle and beckoned me forward. In his hand was a traditional Cherokee knife, blade gleaming in the firelight from the giant's eyes. Offer your blood to the sacred circle, he said quietly. Promise that you'll protect the burial sites with your life. Mean it, Sam. The guardian will know if you're lying. I took the knife and stepped into the circle. The Cherokee artifacts seemed to glow with their own inner light now, responding to the ritual. Around us, the terrified townspeople watched in silence. I drew the blade across my palm. Blood dropped onto the sacred items, and immediately I felt something change in the air. A connection formed between me, the artifacts, and the ancient guardian towering above us. I, Samuel Ironforge, promise to protect the sacred burial places of the Cherokee Nation with my life, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the still air. I will restore what was disturbed and guard what should not be touched. I offer my blood to seal this promise. The giant's burning eyes stared down at me for a long moment. Then it spoke in a voice like distant thunder. The debt is acknowledged, but trust must be earned. The stone guardian raised one massive hand, and I thought it was going to crush me. Instead, it pointed to the mountain where the burial site lay destroyed. Restore the sacred places. Return the dead to proper rest. Prove your words with actions. Then something impossible happened. The giant began to shrink, not disappearing, but condensing itself into a smaller form. In moments, the 30-foot stone guardian had become a man-sized figure, still made of granite, but able to walk among us without destroying everything it touched. I will watch, it said. I will judge. And with that, it turned and walked back toward the mountains, leaving a trail of cracked asphalt, but no more destruction. The townspeople slowly emerged from hiding, staring at me like I'd grown a second head. I couldn't blame them. 5 minutes ago, they'd been going about their evening routines. Now they'd watched me bargain with a living mountain to save their lives. Joseph, standing bare, helped me bandage my bleeding hand. This is just the beginning, he said quietly. You've made a sacred promise. The guardian will hold you to every word. Over the next 3 days, I learned what that meant. First, I had to return to the burial site and properly enter the remains of the archaeological team. The giant watched from a distance as I worked, its granite form, now human-sized, but still unmistakably ancient and powerful. Every time I felt like giving up, those burning coal eyes reminded me that people's lives depended on my keeping this promise. The Cherokee community helped me restore the burial mound. We worked with hand tools, carefully replacing every stone and handful of earth exactly as it had been before the archaeologists arrived. Joseph led ceremonies to cleanse the site and apologized to the ancestors whose rest had been disturbed. But the hardest part was dealing with the official investigation. The Park Service wanted answers about 5 dead archaeologists and a missing ranger. Tom Whitfield was listed as disappeared, even though I knew the giant had crushed him to powder. How do you explain something like that in a government report? I told them there had been a landslide, unstable ground due to spring thaw. The burial mound had collapsed, tragically killing the research team. Tom had gone missing during the rescue attempt, probably fell into a crevasse that opened during the seismic event. They believed me because the alternative was impossible. But some people in town knew the truth. They'd seen the stone giant walking through their streets, felt their windows shake with each footstep. These witnesses stayed quiet, though. Mountain people understand that some things are better left unspoken. The Cherokee community accepted me as a guardian of their sacred places. It wasn't an honor I'd asked for, but it was one I'd earned with blood. Joseph Standing Bear began teaching me the proper ceremonies, the right way to approach burial sites, how to read the warning signs when something was disturbed. The guardian won't always be so merciful, he warned me. Stone people have long memories and little patience. You must never let sacred places be disturbed again. 3 weeks after the incident, Dr. Elizabeth Harper from the University of North Carolina contacted me about continuing the archaeological study. She'd heard about the landslide that killed Dr. Chen's team and wanted to resume their work with better safety precautions. I met her at the site, which now looked completely natural again. The burial mound rose from the forest floor exactly as it had for centuries, showing no sign of recent disturbance. Grass was already growing over the restored earth. "I'm sorry, Dr. Harper," I told her. "This site has been declared permanently off-limits due to geological instability." She argued with me for 20 minutes, citing academic freedom and the importance of preserving Cherokee history through scientific study. I let her talk. Then I pointed to a nearby tree where the stone guardian stood motionless, looking exactly like an ancient Cherokee statue someone might have carved centuries ago. "You see that figure over there?" I said. "Local Cherokee tradition says it's a guardian spirit that protects this place. They believe it comes alive when the sacred sites are threatened." Dr. Harper laughed. "Surely you don't believe such superstitions, Ranger Ironforge." The statue's head turned slightly to look at her, eyes glowing coal red for just a moment before returning to granite gray. Dr. Harper went very pale. Did that thing just move?" "Mountain shadows can play tricks on your eyes," I said. "But the Cherokee take their guardian spirits seriously, as do I." She left that afternoon and never came back. The stone guardian remained at the burial site, sometimes looking like a statue, other times walking the perimeter of the sacred ground. We had an understanding now. I would protect the Cherokee burial places, and it would remain dormant unless needed. But late at night, when I was alone in my ranger cabin, I sometimes heard Tom's voice on the radio, still trying to lure me back to Miller's Creek Bridge, still insisting that the giant had shown him something beautiful. And I knew that some debts can never be fully paid. 6 months later, I received a letter from the Eastern Band, Cherokee Nation formally appointing me as guardian of sacred sites. It wasn't an official government position, but it carried more weight than any federal badge ever could. Along with the letter came a traditional Cherokee peace pipe and a warning. "The responsibility is yours for life, Samuel Ironforge. The Stone Guardian will not accept your resignation." I kept that letter in my desk drawer right next to the ancient treaty that still bore my handwriting in century-old brown ink. Some nights I'd take both documents out and stare at them, trying to understand how my life had become connected to events from 1782. The Cherokee elders told me it was spiritual inheritance. "Blood calls to blood across time," Joseph Standing Bear explained. "Your ancestor made the original promise. When it was broken, the debt passed to you." Other nights, I wondered if I was simply losing my mind. But the Stone Guardian was real enough. I saw it regularly during my patrols of the sacred sites. Sometimes it appeared as a granite statue, weathered and ancient. Other times, I'd glimpse a human-shaped figure moving through the forest, always watching, always protecting. 3 times that first year, I had to turn away researchers who wanted to study Cherokee burial sites. Each time, the Guardian's presence helped convince them to look elsewhere. Word spread quietly through academic circles. The Cherokee sites near Grandfather Mountain were off-limits, protected by a ranger who took his job very seriously and backed up by local superstitions that made fieldwork uncomfortable. The 4th time was different. A team from the Smithsonian arrived with federal permits, government backing, and a mandate to catalog Cherokee artifacts for a new exhibit on Native American history. Their leader, Dr. Marcus Webb had the kind of authority that could override my local jurisdiction. Ranger Ironforge, HE, he said, spreading official documents across my desk. We understand you've had some incidents here, rock slides, geological instability. We've brought ground-penetrating radar and engineering consultants. Safety won't be an issue. I tried to explain about Cherokee cultural sensitivities, the importance of leaving burial sites undisturbed. Dr. Webb nodded politely, but made it clear the excavation would proceed regardless. That night I hiked up to the burial site and found the stone guardian waiting for me. They come with government papers, it said, its voice like distant thunder. They believe authority protects them from consequences. I tried to stop them. They have federal permits. Your ancestors' promise did not include exceptions for federal permits. The guardian's coal-fire eyes burned brighter in the darkness. I could feel heat radiating from its granite skin, see the Cherokee war paint tattoos shifting and moving across its stone features. What do you want me to do? I can't fight the federal government. You can choose whether to honor your promise or break it. The next morning, Dr. Webb's team arrived at the burial site with trucks full of equipment. I was there waiting for them, along with Joseph Standing Bear and a dozen other Cherokee community members. Dr. Webb, I said as he climbed out of his vehicle, I need you to see something before you start work. I led him to the restored burial mound where the stone guardian stood, motionless, appearing for all the world like an ancient Cherokee statue carved from local granite. Beautiful craftsmanship, Dr. Webb said, examining the figure. Pre-Columbian, I'd estimate. This is exactly the kind of artifact our exhibit needs to showcase. The guardian's eyes flared red. Dr. Webb stepped back, startled. Was that some kind of optical effect? Cherokee tradition says the guardian protects sacred places, I told him. It's said to come alive when burial sites are threatened. Folklore and superstition, Dr. Webb waved dismissively. We're scientists, Ranger. We deal in facts, not legends. He reached out to touch the guardian's granite face. The stone figure caught his wrist in a grip that made the man scream. Leave, the guardian said, its voice causing birds to flee from trees throughout the forest. Take your machines and your permits and leave. Dr. Webb's face went white with terror. When the guardian released him, he stumbled backward, cradling his injured wrist. What is that thing? That's the guardian I've been trying to tell you about, I said. It doesn't recognize federal authority. The archaeological team packed up their equipment in record time. As their trucks disappeared down the mountain road, Joseph Standing Bear placed a hand on my shoulder. You chose well, Sam. The guardian is pleased. But that night, lying in my cabin, I realized the full weight of what I'd committed to. I was no longer just a park ranger doing a job. I was bound to these mountains and the Cherokee sacred sites for the rest of my life. The stone guardian would be watching, judging every decision I made. And sometimes late at night, I still heard voices on the radio. Tom's voice trying to lure me back to Miller's Creek Bridge. Dr. Chen's voice, asking for help from inside the collapsed burial mound. The voices of everyone who had died because the ancient treaty was broken. They reminded me that some promises carry a price that echoes across generations. 7 years have passed since the stone giant first awakened. I'm still the guardian of sacred sites, still making my patrols through the Cherokee burial grounds. The granite figure still watches from the forest, sometimes statue still, sometimes moving through the trees like a living reminder of the promise I made. I've turned away 37 research teams, 12 treasure hunters, and 1 Hollywood film crew that wanted to shoot a horror movie at the burial site. Each time, the guardian's presence helped convince them to find other locations. The Cherokee community treats me with respect and gratitude. They know I've kept the sacred places safe, honored the ancient agreements, but they also know the burden I carry. Some men become guardians by choice, Joseph Standing Bear told me recently. Others have guardianship chosen for them. The mountain spirits picked you for this role long before you were born, Sam. Your ancestors' promise was just the beginning. I still don't fully understand how my handwriting appeared on a 200-year-old treaty, or why I was chosen to pay a debt I didn't create. But I've learned that some questions don't have answers that make sense to the rational mind. What I do know is this: the Cherokee burial sites remain undisturbed, the sacred places are protected, and the stone guardian sleeps peacefully in its forest home. And on quiet nights, when the wind blows just right through the mountains, I can hear the voices of the ancestors whispering their approval. But I also hear other voices, the ones that call from Miller's Creek Bridge, promising to show me beautiful things if I'll just come and see. Some debts can never be fully paid. Some guardians never rest, and some promises bind not just the person who makes them, but their bloodline for generations to come. My name is Samuel Ironforge, and this is my story. I tell it to you now as a warning. Some things should stay buried. Some places should remain untouched. And some ancient promises should never be broken. Because when they are, someone has to pay the price. And the stone guardians never forget. My name is Benjamin Ravenhill, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 15 years. People call me Ben. I study the birds that live here, especially the ones that come out at night. I have a degree in bird science, and I keep careful records of when different birds fly through our mountains. I never believed the old stories about giant flying creatures. Not once in 30 years of watching birds did I think those tales were real. The Cherokee people who lived here long ago told stories about huge thunderbirds, but I always figured they were just legends. That changed in September 1992. I was working near Cataract Falls, way back in the mountains where tourists never go. It's 18 miles from the nearest town, and there are no roads. The only way in or out is hiking, and even helicopters can't land because of the thick trees. The waterfall drops 200 feet down a cliff face, and there are caves in the limestone rocks all around. I was there to check on a research team from the university. 4 bird scientists had been camping near the falls for a week, studying the fall migration patterns. But when I hiked in that morning, something was very wrong. The first thing I noticed was the silence. In 15 years of working these mountains, I'd never heard such complete quiet. No bird songs, no rustling in the leaves. Even the insects had gone silent. The forest felt dead. Then I found the camp. The 4 researchers were at the bottom of the waterfall, and they were all dead. But it wasn't how they died that made my hands shake as I called it in on my radio. It was the way they looked. Their bodies had been torn apart by something with claws, but not bear claws or mountain lion claws. These were different, deeper, like giant bird talons, but impossibly big. The biggest golden eagle has claws maybe 2 inches long. These marks looked like they came from claws over a foot long. All their expensive recording equipment was smashed to pieces. But I found one tape recorder that still worked. When I played the tape, all I heard was the most horrible shrieking sound I'd ever encountered. It wasn't human, but it wasn't like any bird I knew either. The sound made my teeth hurt. I've studied over 200 different bird species in these mountains. I know the call of every owl, hawk, and eagle that lives here. This sound didn't match anything in my books or my memory. That's when I noticed something else strange. My binoculars kept fogging up on the inside even though the air was dry. My compass needle was spinning in slow circles instead of pointing north. And when I turned on my night vision scope to look around, it showed heat signatures moving in the trees that disappeared the moment I looked directly at them. I found one of the researcher's journals in his tent. The last few entries talked about seeing an impossible bird flying around the waterfall at night. He wrote about red eyes that glowed in the dark and wings so big they blocked out the stars. Dr. Martinez had written, Day 6. The bird came back again last night. It's not like anything in our field guides, standing upright like a person but with wings that must be 15 feet across. The other team members think I'm losing my mind, but I know what I saw. The final entry was from the night before I found them. It's watching us from the cliff. Those red eyes never blink. Sarah is scared. We should leave, but the equipment is picking up sounds we've never recorded before. If we can just get one clear recording. I packed up what I could carry and hiked out fast. The whole way back, I felt like something was following me through the trees. Every time I turned around, I saw nothing, but the feeling never went away. When I got back to the ranger stat, I told my supervisor everything I'd seen. He said it was probably a bear attack, even though I'd never seen bear damage that looked anything like what I found at that camp. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those claw marks and that horrible shrieking on the tape. I'd spent my whole career studying birds, but I'd never seen anything that could make marks like that. The next day, they sent me back with Maria Santos, another ranger who'd worked the park for 8 years. Maria was good with electronics and radio equipment. She brought a camera and better recording gear to document the scene properly. The hike-in felt different this time. The silence was even deeper, if that was possible. Our footsteps seemed too loud on the trail. When we stopped to rest, we couldn't hear anything at all. No wind in the leaves, no water running in the streams we passed. It was like the whole mountain was holding its breath. "This doesn't feel right," Maria said when we were about halfway there. "Where are all the birds?" I'd been wondering the same thing. During migration season, these mountains should be full of warblers and thrushes flying south. We should have been hearing dozens of different bird calls. Instead, nothing. When we got to the waterfall, Maria started taking pictures while I looked around for anything I'd missed the day before. That's when I found the marks on the cliff face. About 150 feet up the rock wall, something had carved deep scratches into the stone. They looked like claw marks, but they were huge. Each scratch was over a foot long and deep enough that I could see them clearly from the ground. "Ben," Maria called, "you need to see this." She was standing by the destroyed campsite, looking at her camera. The display screen was filled with static, and the camera was making a weird buzzing sound. "It was working fine a minute ago," she said. "Now look at it." I pulled out my radio to call the station, but it was doing the same thing, just static and electronic noise. My compass was spinning again, and when I checked my altimeter, it was showing that we were somehow 300 feet higher than we actually were. "Something's interfering with our electronics," I told Maria. Same thing happened yesterday. We decided to set up camp and wait until morning. Maybe whatever was causing the interference would stop, and we could get a clear radio signal to call for backup. As the sun went down, the temperature dropped fast. By the time it was fully dark, it felt like winter instead of September. We built a fire and tried to stay warm, but the cold seemed to come from inside our bones. Around midnight, we heard the wings. It started as a soft whooshing sound, like wind through the trees. But there was no wind. The leaves weren't moving at all. The sound got louder, coming from somewhere above the waterfall. "What is that?" Maria whispered. I grabbed my night vision scope and pointed it toward the sound. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Then something huge moved across my field of view. It was flying between us and the moon, and its wings blocked out the light for almost 3 seconds. Based on the size of the shadow, whatever it was had to have wings at least 15 feet across, maybe more. "Did you see that?" I asked Maria. She was staring up at the sky with her mouth open. "That wasn't a bird," she said. "Birds don't fly like that." The thing had been moving too slowly for any bird I knew. Most large birds flap their wings fast to stay in the air. This thing was gliding, barely moving its wings at all, like it was floating instead of flying. Then we saw the eyes. 2 red lights appeared in the darkness above the waterfall. They weren't reflecting our firelight. They were glowing on their own, like hot coals. The lights were too far apart to belong to any normal animal. They had to be at least 3 feet from each other. The lights moved slowly from side to side like something. Hing was turning its head back and forth, looking around, looking for something, looking for us. "We need to get out of here," Maria said. She was trying to pack up her equipment with shaking hands. But before we could move, the red lights started coming down toward us. I could hear the wings beating now, slow and powerful. Each beat made a sound like a huge flag flapping in a strong wind. Whatever it was big enough that I could feel the air moving when its wings came down. "Run!" I told Maria. We grabbed our backpacks and ran toward the trail, but we'd only made it about 50 yards when Maria screamed. I turned around and saw her pointing up at the sky. The thing was right above us now, so close that I could make out its shape against the stars. It looked like a person with wings. The body was human-like, but bigger, maybe 8 feet tall. The wings were enormous, stretching out on both sides like a bat's wings, but covered with dark fur instead of skin. And those red eyes were staring right down at us. For a moment, none of us moved. The creature hovered in the air above our heads, and we stood frozen on the trail below. I felt like those red eyes were looking right through me, reading my thoughts. Then Maria's radio crackled to life. "Base to Santos, do you copy? Over." The sound seemed to break whatever spell had been holding us. The creature let out a shriek that made the one on the tape sound like a whisper. The noise was so loud that I had to cover my ears and so high-pitched that it felt like needles in my brain. Then the thing shot straight up into the sky and disappeared. We ran the rest of the way back to the ranger station without stopping. The next morning, our supervisor didn't believe our story. He said we'd probably seen a large owl and let our imaginations run wild. When Maria tried to show him the pictures she'd taken, her camera was completely dead. All the pictures were gone, replaced by corrupted files that looked like static. But I knew what we'd seen was real, and I knew it wasn't finished with us. I spent the next few days going through old incident reports, looking for anything similar. That's when I found the pattern. Every few years, going back almost 20 years, there had been reports of strange accidents near Cataract Falls. Hikers found dead at the bottom of cliffs, campers who disappeared completely with only their torn-up gear left behind, rock climbers who fell from easy routes they'd climbed dozens of times before. All the incidents happened in late September or early October, all during the full moon, and in every case, there were reports of electrical equipment failing before the accidents. I also found something else. Cherokee tribal records from the 1800s described a creature they called the thunderbird's shadow. According to the stories, it appeared before disasters and carried away people who saw too much. The tribal elders said the creature lived in caves behind waterfalls and only came out when the moon was full. They believed it could see the future and tried to prevent bad things from happening by taking away the people who would cause them. But the old stories also said the creature was getting confused in the modern world. Instead of preventing disasters, it was starting to cause them. I was reading these reports when Maria called me on the radio. "Ben, you need to get down here right now," she said. Her voice sounded scared. "Something's happening at the falls." I grabbed my gear and hiked down as fast as I could. When I got there, Maria was standing by the waterfall with her radio in her hand. She was trying to contact the base station, but all she was getting was that same horrible shrieking sound we'd heard on the researchers' tape. "It started about an hour ago," she told me. "Every time I try to use the radio, I get that sound instead of the dispatcher." I tried my own radio and got the same thing. The shrieking was so loud it hurt to listen to. Here's something else," Maria said. She pointed up at the cliff face where I'd seen the claw marks. "Look, there were new marks, even bigger than the ones I'd found before. These scratches went all the way from the top of the waterfall down to about 50 feet above the ground. Whatever had made them had to have claws over a foot long and strength enough to carve through solid rock." "It's marking its territory," I said, "like a cat scratching a tree." "Territory for what?" Before I could answer, we heard voices coming from the trail. A group of 3 hikers was walking toward the waterfall, laughing and talking loudly. They had backpacks and looked like they were planning to camp overnight. "You folks need to turn around," I called to them. "This area is closed for safety reasons." "Come on, Ranger," one of them said. "We hiked all the way out here. We're not hurting anything." I tried to explain that it wasn't safe, but they wouldn't listen. Finally, I had to threaten to arrest them before they agreed to leave. But as they were walking away, the youngest one, a girl who looked maybe 20 years old, stopped and turned back. "Did you guys see that?" she asked. We all looked where she was pointing. There, about halfway up the waterfall, was a dark shape pressed against the rock wall. It was too big to be a person, and the wrong shape to be an animal. As we watched, the shape moved. It spread out what had to be wings, and then disappeared into a crack in the cliff face. "What the hell was that?" one of the hikers said. "Cave bat," I lied. "They get pretty big up here." The hikers left after that, but I could tell they didn't believe me, and I couldn't blame them. What we'd seen was way too big to be any kind of bat. That night, Maria and I took turns keeping watch. We'd brought sleeping bags and planned to camp near the waterfall to see if the creature would come back. Around 2 a.m., it was my turn to watch while Maria slept. I was sitting by our small campfire when I heard her scream. I turned around and saw that her sleeping bag was empty. Maria was gone. Then I heard her voice coming from somewhere above me. "Ben, help me! It's got me!" I looked up and saw the most terrifying sight of my life. The creature was flying about 100 feet above the ground, and it was carrying Maria in its claws. She was struggling and screaming, but the thing's grip was too strong for her to break free. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it up at them. In the beam of light, I could see the creature clearly for the first time. It was even bigger than I'd thought. The body was like a muscular man's, but covered in dark gray fur. The wings were huge and leathery, like a bat's wings, but much thicker. Its legs ended in claws that looked like they could cut through steel. But the worst part was its face. It was almost human, but the eyes were too big and glowed like red lights. When it looked down at me, I felt like I was staring into the face of something that shouldn't exist. The creature flew in a slow circle above the waterfall, carrying Maria higher and higher. She was still screaming, but her voice was getting weaker. I didn't know what to do. I had no way to reach them, and even if I could, how do you fight something that can fly? Then I remembered something from my bird research. Many birds can be confused or scared by high-frequency sounds. I had a device in my pack that played recorded bird distress calls, used to study how different species react to danger signals. I pulled out the device and turned it to the highest frequency setting. The sound it made was so high-pitched that I could barely hear it, but I knew it was there. The effect was immediate. The creature let out a shriek of pain and anger. Its flight became unsteady, and it started dropping toward the ground, but it was still holding Maria. I kept the device pointed at the creature and followed it as it flew lower and lower. When it was about 50 feet above the waterfall, it finally let go. Maria fell into the deep pool at the base of the falls. I jumped in after her and pulled her to shore. She was unconscious but alive, with deep cuts on her shoulders, where the creature's claws had grabbed her. As I was checking her injuries, I looked up and saw the creature perched on the cliff face above us. It was holding its head with one of its hands like the sound was causing it pain. Those red eyes stared down at me with what looked like pure hatred. Then it spread its wings and flew away into the darkness. I carried Maria back to the ranger station and called for a helicopter to take her to the hospital. She spent 3 days unconscious, and when she woke up, she couldn't remember anything that had happened after we'd seen the shape on the cliff. The doctor said she'd been in shock and might never remember the attack. Maybe that was for the best. 3 weeks later, I was back at Cataract Falls. I know that sounds crazy after what happened to Maria, but I had to understand what that thing was and why it was killing people. The university researchers, the hikers who'd died over the years, Maria, they all had one thing in common. They'd all seen the creature before it attacked them. I spent those 3 weeks reading everything I could find about the Cherokee legends and similar creatures from around the world. What I learned scared me more than the attack itself. According to the old stories, the creature wasn't just a monster. It was something like a guardian, but one that had been corrupted over time. The Cherokee believed it was supposed to protect the sacred places in the mountains by warning people away from danger. But something had gone wrong. Maybe it was the modern world with all our electronics and aircraft confusing its natural instincts. Maybe it was just old age making it crazy. Whatever the reason, instead of warning people away, it had started killing them. The legend said it was drawn to electromagnetic activity, which explained why our radios and cameras always failed around it. They also said it could see into the future, which was why it appeared before disasters. But the most important thing I learned was that the creature had a weakness. High-frequency sounds could hurt it, just like I discovered when I saved Maria. The Cherokee had used bone whistles and drums to drive it away when it became dangerous. I went back to the waterfall armed with every high-frequency device I could find. Bird distress calls, dog whistles, even a small ultrasonic pest repeller. If the creature came for me, I wanted to be ready. I didn't have to wait long. As soon as the sun went down, the temperature dropped and the electromagnetic interference started. My radio filled with static and my compass began spinning in circles. Then I heard the wings. This time, I was ready for it. As soon as I saw those red eyes in the darkness above me, I turned on all my devices at once. The creature's shriek of pain echoed off the cliff walls. It dropped out of the sky and landed about 50 feet away from me on the other side of the waterfall. In the light of my flashlight, I could see it clearly. It was even more terrifying up close than it had been in the air. Standing upright, it had to be at least 8 feet tall. Its wings were folded against its back, but I could see they were huge. The muscles in its arms and chest looked strong enough to tear a person apart without effort. But what scared me most were its eyes. They weren't just glowing red lights. They were intelligent eyes, and they were full of anger and pain. The creature took a step toward me, and I increased the volume on my devices. It stopped and shook its head, like it was trying to clear away the sound. We stared at each other across the waterfall for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. I could see it was fighting against the pain from the high-frequency sounds, trying to get close enough to grab me. Then it did. It's something I didn't expect. It spoke. The voice was like gravel and wind, barely human, but clear enough to understand. "You see too much," it said. "You bring others. You disturb the sacred places." "I'm just doing my job," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I study birds. I don't want to hurt anything. Your machines hurt the sky, drive away the real birds, make me confused." I started to understand. The creature wasn't just a mindless monster. It was trying to protect something, but it couldn't tell the difference between people who meant harm and people who were just doing research. "I can help," I said. "I can keep people away from here. You don't have to kill anyone." The creature tilted its head, like it was thinking about what I'd said. For a moment I thought maybe we could reach some kind of understanding. Then a helicopter appeared over the tree line. I'd forgotten that Maria had called for backup before she was attacked. The rescue team was finally arriving, 3 weeks late, but with full military gear and bright searchlights. The helicopter's spotlight hit the creature, and everything went wrong. The bright light seemed to drive it into a rage. It let out a shriek that was louder than anything I'd heard before and launched itself into the air. The helicopter pilot tried to maneuver away, but the creature was faster. I watched in horror as the creature grabbed the helicopter's landing skids. The pilot fought to stay in the air, but the creature's weight was too much. They started spinning toward the ground. At the last second, the creature let go and flew toward me instead. I was ready for it. As it dove down, claws extended, I pointed all my sound devices directly at it and turned them up to maximum volume. The creature hit me like a truck, but the sounds were affecting it too. Its claws scraped against my jacket but didn't get a solid grip. We tumbled together toward the edge of the waterfall. For a moment, we were both falling toward the rocks below. I could feel the creature's claws trying to grab me, probably planning to seek airy me away like it had done to Maria. But the high-frequency sounds were still playing from the devices in my backpack. Even while falling, the creature was in too much pain to get a good grip on me. I hit the water at the base of the falls. When I surfaced, the creature was gone. The helicopter had managed to land safely on the other side of the waterfall. The rescue team pulled me out of the water and checked me for injuries. I had some deep scratches and a lot of bruises, but I was alive. As they were loading me into the helicopter, I looked back at the cliff face one last time. The creature was there, perched on a ledge about halfway up the waterfall. It was watching us leave, but it made no move to attack. Those red eyes followed us until we disappeared over the tree line. The official report said I'd fallen into the waterfall during a routine patrol and been rescued by a helicopter crew. No mention of any creature, no mention of the researchers who'd been killed or Maria's attack. The Park Service transferred me to a desk job in Nashville the next month. They said I needed time to recover from my accident, but I knew the real reason. They didn't want me going back to Cataract Falls. I didn't fight the transfer. The truth is, I couldn't handle being in the mountains anymore. Every time I heard a bird call or saw something move in my peripheral vision, I would freeze up with panic. The doctors called it PTSD, but I knew what it really was. I was afraid of the sky. Maria recovered from her injuries, but she never went back to field work either. She took a job with the Park Service's computer department and moved to a city apartment where she couldn't see any large birds from her windows. Sometimes we talk on the phone. She still can't remember what happened that night, and I've never told her. Some things are better forgotten, but I haven't forgotten. Every septi. Ember, around the time of the full moon, there are reports of electromagnetic disturbances near Cataract Falls. Hikers' GPS devices stop working. Cell phones lose signal for no reason. Compasses spin in circles. The Park Service has started quietly discouraging people from camping in that area during migration season. They cite increased bear activity and unstable rock formations. But I know the real reason. The creature is still there. I still study birds, but only from books now. I can't bring myself to use binoculars or go bird watching. The sight of anything with wings larger than a robin makes my hands shake. Sometimes, late at night, I get phone calls from other rangers who've heard rumors about what really happened at Cataract Falls. They want to know if the stories are true. They want to know what they should do if they see red eyes in the sky. I always tell them the same thing. If you see something that shouldn't exist, don't try to study it. Don't try to photograph it. Don't try to prove it's real. Just walk away and don't go back. Some of them listen, others don't. Last month, a young ranger named Peterson called to tell me about strange electromagnetic readings he'd detected near the waterfall. He wanted to investigate with a full research team. I told him not to go. I explained about the equipment failures and the pattern of accidents over the years. But Peterson was young and eager to make a name for himself in the scientific community. He wouldn't listen. They found Peterson's body at the base of Cataract Falls 3 days later. The official report blamed it on a climbing accident, but I knew better. The creature is still protecting its territory, still confused by our modern world, still unable to tell the difference between people who mean harm and people who are just curious. And every year, more people go missing in the mountains during migration season. I could try to warn them. I could tell them about the red eyes and the electromagnetic disturbances and the creature that shouldn't exist. But who would believe me? I'm just a retired park ranger with PTSD who's afraid of birds. So I'll end this the way I started it. My name is Benjamin Ravenhill, and I spent 15 years studying the birds of the Great Smoky Mountains. I thought I knew everything about the creatures that live in those peaks and valleys. I was wrong. If you ever find yourself hiking near Cataract Falls in late September, and your electronics start acting strange, and the birds suddenly go quiet, and you see red lights moving through the darkness above the trees, I have one piece of advice for you. Don't look directly at them, and whatever you do, don't go back for a second look. Some things are better left alone in the mountains where they belong. My name is Gabriel Shadowbrook, and I've been patrolling these mountains at night for 19 years. People think it's strange that I prefer working in the dark, but the truth is simple. I can't sleep anyway. Haven't been able to since I was a kid, so why not put the insomnia to good use? Shenandoah National Park covers a lot of ground, but my section is special. I work the remote areas near Old Rag Mountain, about 22 miles from Skyline Drive. Out here, there's no street lights, no car headlights, nothing but stars and whatever I bring with me. It's perfect for catching poachers, and I'm good at it. 23 arrests in the last 5 years, all at night. Most rangers think I'm weird. They call me the night owl behind my back. But Patricia Mills, she's different. She works the day shift in my area, and we swap notes every morning. Good woman, Patricia. Been doing this almost as long as me. The heat wave started in early August. Hadn't rained in 6 weeks, and the forest was dry as paper. Fire danger was through the roof. But that's not what made this August different. What made it different was the Hendricks family. I found them on August 15th, just after midnight. Family of 6 from Maryland, camping near the old granite cliffs. They'd set up a nice site by the natural spring. Smart choice, given how hot it was. Problem was, they were all dead. Now, I've seen death before. Car accidents, heart attacks, even a bear mauling back in '78. But nothing like this. The Hendricks family looked like they were sleeping. Perfect position, no signs of struggle, no wounds I could see. But they were cold, stone cold. And there wasn't a drop of blood in any of them. I called it in, of course. Had to hike back to my truck to use the radio. The whole way I kept thinking about how peaceful they looked. Too peaceful. Like they'd just laid down and emptied out. The weird part was their shadows. I know this sounds crazy, but when I shined my flashlight around the campsite, their shadows didn't look right. Too dark, maybe. Too sharp. And they seemed to stick around longer than they should have when I moved the light. But that was probably just stress. Had to be. The medical examiner came up the next day with Patricia. Doc Peterson. Nice guy. Been doing this for 30 years. He looked at those bodies for 3 hours, then pulled me aside. Gabriel, he said, I've never seen anything like this. Complete blood loss, but no wounds, no punctures, no cuts, nothing. It's like their blood just left. Patricia was quiet during the whole examination. She helped bag the personal items, took photos, did everything by the book. But I could tell something was bothering her. You okay? I asked her as we packed up. Just thinking, she said. That's the third family this summer. Third what? Third family found drained. You probably didn't hear about the others because they weren't in your section. But there was the Kowalski family in July and the Patels in June. Same thing every time. No blood, no wounds, perfectly preserved. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because the reports all said natural causes. Some kind of rare blood disorder. The families all had it, apparently. Genetic thing. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about those shadows. How they looked too dark, too solid. I'd been working nights for 19 years, and I knew shadows. These were different. I decided to do some research. Spent my day off at the library in Luray, reading about the history of Old Rag Mountain. Turns out the area has quite a past. Civil War battlefield with a field hospital right near where the Hendricks family died. Before that, it was part of the Underground Railroad, and before that, native burial grounds. Low of death in those mountains. A lot of blood soaked into that soil, but I don't believe in ghost stories. Never have. I believe in what I can see, what I can prove. And what I could prove was that 3 families had died in my park in 3 months, all the same way. That was enough to keep me alert. The next week was quiet. Too quiet, really. Usually August brings campers every night, but word must have gotten out about the deaths. Even the poachers were staying away. I did my usual rounds, checking the campsites, walking the trails, listening for anything out of place. The drought was getting worse. Springs were drying up, and the animals were getting desperate. I saw deer coming down to the road looking for water, raccoons digging in the dry creek beds. But no people. For 5 straight nights, I was alone out there. On the 6th night, things changed. I was walking the trail near Bear Rock when I heard voices. Quiet talking, like people trying not to wake someone. I switched off my flashlight and used the night vision goggles. Military surplus from Vietnam still worked great. Through the green glow, I could see a campsite about 50 yards ahead. 2 tents, small fire, looked like a family. I watched them for a while, making sure they were following fire safety rules. The last thing we needed was a wildfire. Everything looked normal. Mom and Dad were cleaning up dinner. 2 kids were in sleeping bags by the fire. Standard camping scene. But something felt wrong. I watched for another 10 minutes, trying to figure out what was bothering me. Then I realized the shadows around their fire were moving wrong. The flames were steady, but the shadows were dancing like the fire was wild. I blinked hard, refocused the goggles. Same thing. Shadows moving independent of the light source. That's when I decided to make contact. "Hello, the camp," I called out, standard ranger greeting. "Park service." The talking stopped. I waited for them to call back, but nothing. I walked closer, flashlight on now, making noise so I wouldn't spook them. "Just checking to make sure everyone's safe," I said. "Mind if I come in?" Still no answer. I walked into their campsite and found them exactly like the Hendricks family. All four of them, perfectly positioned, completely drained. Still warm. This time, I didn't hike back to call it in. I had my radio with me, and I used it right there. Base, this is Ranger Shadowbrook. I need medical and police at Bear Rock campsite immediately. We have 4 more. 4 more what, Gabriel? Patricia's voice came back. She was working late shift at the station. 4 more drained bodies, same as the Hendricks. Long pause. Gabriel, are you sure they're dead? I walked over to the nearest one, a man in his 40s wearing a Redskins t-shirt. I put my hand on his neck, checking for a pulse. His skin was cold, but not cold like he'd been dead for hours. Cold like he'd been in a freezer. Dead sure, I said into the radio. Stay put. I'm coming up with backup. While I waited, I looked around the campsite with my goggles. The shadows were normal now, acting like shadows should, but I kept getting the feeling I was being watched. I walked around the camp perimeter, looking for tracks, signs of struggle, anything that might explain what happened. That's when I found the photographs. They had a Polaroid camera, and someone had been taking pictures. The photos were scattered on the ground near one of the tents. I picked them up, thinking they might help identify the family. The first few were normal. Kids playing, setting up camp, roasting marshmallows. Happy family stuff. But the last photo stopped me cold. It showed the family around their campfire, all 4 of them. But there were shadows in the picture that didn't belong to anyone. Dark human shapes standing behind the family, like other people had been there when the photo was taken, except there were only 4 people at the campsite. I counted the shadows and the photo. 4 family members, 4 matching shadows behind them, plus 3 extra shadows that didn't belong to anybody. I looked at the photo timestamp, 9:47 p.m. I'd been watching the campsite since 9:30. There had never been anyone else there. I was still staring at the photo when Patricia arrived with 2 deputies. They hiked in with heavy flashlights, making enough noise to wake half the mountain. Gabriel, Patricia called. Where are you? Here, I called back, pocketing the photo. Patricia took one look at the bodies and cursed. Same as before? Exactly the same. We went through the same routine. Medical examiner, body bags, evidence collection. The official cause of death would be the same mysterious blood disorder. The photo I'd found would disappear into some file cabinet, and everyone would pretend this was normal. But I kept thinking about those extra shadows, 3 of them, standing right behind the family. And I couldn't shake the feeling that they'd been there the whole time, even when I was watching through the goggles. I just hadn't been able to see them. That night, after everyone left, I sat in my truck and looked at the photo again under the dome light. The shadows were definitely human-shaped, but they were too dark, like they absorbed light instead of just blocking it. I'd never seen anything like it, but I was starting to think I might see it again. The photo bothered me for 3 days. I carried it in my shirt pocket and looked at it whenever I had a quiet moment. Those extra shadows never made sense, but on Friday night, they started making terrible sense. I was patrolling the trail near White Oak Canyon when I saw light ahead. Flashlight beams moving through the trees. I followed standard procedure, observed first, then made contact. Through my night vision, I could see 2 people hiking with heavy packs, college-age kids, moving fast despite the heat. They kept looking over their shoulders like something was following them. I was about to call out when I saw their shadows. Even in the green glow of the night vision, I could see that their shadows were wrong. The kids were walking north up the trail, but their shadows were pointing east, like the light source was coming from somewhere else. But there was no other light source, just their flashlights. I followed them for half a mile, staying back, trying to understand what I was seeing. The shadows kept pointing the wrong direction. Sometimes they'd swing around and point behind the kids like they were being cast by a light in front of them. But their flashlights were pointing forward. That's when I saw the 3rd shadow. It was walking right behind the 2 kids, matching their pace perfectly. But there was nobody casting it, just a person-shaped shadow following them up the trail. I switched off the night vision and used my own flashlight. In normal light, everything looked fine. 2 kids hiking, 2 normal shadows. Nothing else. But when I switched back to night vision, the 3rd shadow was still there. The kids made camp near the old stone bridge. I watched them set up their tent, start a small fire, cook dinner. Normal camping activities. But through the night vision, that extra shadow stayed right with them, moving when they moved, sitting when they sat. Around midnight, they went into their tent. I waited another hour, then crept closer to check on them. Standard safety patrol. Make sure the fire was out. No food left around for bears. The campsite was dark and quiet. Fire properly extinguished. No food visible. Everything looked good. But when I shined my flashlight on their tent, I could see 3 shadows inside instead of 2. I stared at that tent for 5 full minutes, trying to make sense of it. The extra shadow was moving around inside, independent of the 2 kids. Sometimes it would lean over one of them, like it was looking down at their faces. I was about to wake them up when my radio crackled. "Gabriel, you out there?" Patricia's voice, stressed and urgent. I keyed the radio, keeping my voice low. "Here. What's wrong?" "I need you back at the station. Now. I'm in the middle of something." "Gabriel, I found something. About the families. You need to see this." I looked back at the tent. The extra shadow had stopped moving. "On my way," I said. I hiked back to my truck as fast as I could without running. The whole way, I kept thinking about that shadow inside the tent, leaning over those kids like it was studying them. Patricia was waiting for me at the ranger station with a box of files and photographs spread across the desk. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Look at these," she said, handing me a stack of photos. They were crime scene photos from all 3 family deaths. The Hendricks, the Kowalskis, the Patels. Official police photos, taken during the investigations. "Look at the shadows," Patricia said. I looked. In every photo, there were extra shadows that didn't belong to anyone. Dark human shapes standing around the dead families. "How many?" I asked. Different in each case. The Patels had 2 extra shadows. The Kowalskis had 4. The Hendricks had 5. And tonight I saw 3 around those college kids. Patricia stared at me. "What college kids?" I told her about the hikers, about the shadow I'd seen following them, about the 3 shadows in the tent. "We have to go back," she said. "Right now." "Patricia, it's almost 2 in the morning. They're fine." "No," she said, pulling out another photo. "They're not fine. Look at this." It was a photo I hadn't seen before, taken at the Kowalski campsite. It showed the family around their fire, with the extra shadows standing behind them. But this photo was different. The shadows had faces. Not human faces. Something else. Dark spaces where faces should be, but with features you could almost make out. Eyes that reflected light like an animal's. Mouths that were too wide. "Jesus," I whispered. "We have to go back," Patricia said again. We took her truck and drove as close to the stone bridge as the fire roads would allow. Then we hiked in with heavy-duty flashlights and emergency flares. The campsite was quiet when we got there. Too quiet. No night sounds, no insects, nothing. The tent was still standing, but when I shined my light on it, I could see it was empty. "Where are they?" Patricia whispered. I walked around the campsite looking for signs of struggle, tracks, anything. The sleeping bags were still laid out inside the tent. Their backpacks were still there, but no people. That's when I saw the shadows on the ground. Even with our bright flashlights, there were shadows near the tent that didn't belong to us. Human-shaped shadows lying on the ground like someone had been sleeping there, but there was nobody to cast them. "Patricia," I said quietly, "shine your light over here." She pointed her flashlight at the strange shadows. They didn't disappear like normal shadows would. They stayed right where they were, dark shapes on the ground. "What are they?" she whispered. Before I could answer, I heard footsteps in the woods, slow, careful footsteps, like someone trying to sneak up on us. I grabbed Patricia's arm. "We're leaving. Now." But when we turned to go, our own shadows weren't following us. I looked down at the ground where our shadows should be, then back at the shadows near the tent. 4 shadows now instead of 2. "Run," I said. We ran through the forest like our lives depended on it because I was starting to think they did. Patricia kept up better than I expected. 19 years of hiking will do that. But the whole way back to her truck, I could hear footsteps behind us that didn't match our pace. When we finally reached the vehicle, I made Patricia drive while I watched behind us. In the side mirror, I could see 4 figures following us down the fire road, but when I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. "Where are we going?" Patricia asked, hands shaking on the steering wheel. "Library. I need to research something." "Gabriel, it's 3 in the morning. The library's closed. I know the night security guard. He owes me a favor." 20 minutes later, we were sitting in the Luray Library with every book about local history I could find. Patricia made coffee while I searched through old newspapers and historical records. "What exactly are we looking for?" she asked. "Patterns, connections, something that explains what we're seeing." I found it in a 1924 newspaper article about a missing persons case. 15 people had vanished from the Old Rag Mountain area over a 3-month period. All of them found later, drained of blood, with no explanation. But the interesting part was a witness statement from a surviving camper. He claimed he'd seen shadow people around his campsite the night before his family disappeared. Said the shadows moved independently and seemed to be hunting. "Look at this," I said, showing Patricia the article. She read it twice, then looked up at me. "It's happened before." More than once. I'd found 3 other similar incidents. 1897, 1952, 1978. Always the same pattern. Multiple families found drained. Witnesses reporting shadow people. Then everything goes quiet for 20 or 30 years. "So what are they?" Patricia asked. I kept reading. Most of the historical accounts dismissed the shadow people as folklore or hysteria. But there was one source that took them seriously, a journal entry from 1895 written by a Cherokee medicine man who'd worked with local authorities. According to his account, the shadow people were spirits of those who died violently in the area. They fed on life force and could separate from their original bodies to hunt independently. The more they fed, the stronger they became. It says here they can possess reflections and photographs, I read aloud. And they hunt in groups during times of maximum shadow coverage. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "Gabriel, what if they're not just hunting random campers? What do you mean? Huh? Think about it. You've been patrolling those mountains at night for 19 years. You know every shadow, every dark spot. What if they've been watching you all this time?" I felt cold suddenly. Why would they watch me? Because you're perfect. You work alone, you know the area, you have access to victims. What if they want to use you somehow? Before I could respond, the lights in the library went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a few seconds later, but it was dim and created lots of shadows. Patricia grabbed my arm. "We need to get out of here," she said. I agreed, but when we walked toward the exit, our reflections in the library windows weren't moving with us. They stayed perfectly still while we moved past. "Don't look at the windows," I said. But it was too late. Patricia had already seen her reflection staying behind. She made a sound like someone had punched her in the stomach. That's when I realized the truth. The shadow people weren't just hunting campers. They were collecting shadows, building an army of them, and they wanted mine because I knew the area so well, because I could lead them to more victims. "We have to get to bright light," I said. "Somewhere with no shadows at all." "Where?" "The ranger station. It has emergency floodlights for search and rescue operations." We made it to Patricia's truck, but our shadows didn't get in with us. I could see them standing in the library parking lot as we drove away. "This is insane," Patricia said. "How is this happening?" "I don't know, but we need help." I tried the radio, but all I got was static. Tried my cell phone, but no signal. We were cut off. The ranger station was 15 minutes away. As we got closer, I could see the building was dark. All the lights were out, which was wrong. The station always had some lights on for emergency calls. Patricia parked under the emergency floodlights and turned them on. Brilliant white light flooded the area, washing out every shadow. "Okay," I said. "This should keep us safe while we figure out what to do next." But when we got out of the truck, I realized we still didn't have shadows. Even under the bright lights, we weren't casting any shadows at all. That's when they appeared. Shadow people emerged from the darkness beyond the floodlights. Dozens of them, moving in perfect silence. They looked like people, but made of absolute darkness. And I could see faces in some of them. The families who'd been killed, the college kids from tonight. They couldn't come into the bright light, but they surrounded us completely, waiting. "Gabriel," one of them spoke. It sounded like my own voice, but hollow. "Join us." I looked closer and realized it was true. One of the shadow people had my shape, my posture. It was my shadow, separated from me somehow. "You belong with us," it said. "You've been feeding us for years." "I never fed you anything. Every victim you found, every body you reported, you led us to them first." I felt sick. It was true. I'd been the first to find all the families. I'd been patrolling the areas where they died. "It wasn't your fault," Patricia said beside me. "You were just doing your job." But the shadow version of me kept talking. "Come with us now. Become one of us. Help us feed forever." "No," I said. I grabbed one of the emergency flares from the station supplies, military grade, designed to burn for 30 minutes in all weather. I cracked it and held it high. The brilliant red light pushed the shadow people back even further than the floodlights. "Patricia, get more flares. We're getting out of here." She ran to the supply cabinet while I held them back. But I could see more shadow people appearing at the edge of the light, including Patricia's shadow, which had apparently been separated too. "Gabriel," my shadow said, "you can't run from us forever. We know where you live. We know where everyone you care about lives." I thought about that. Everyone I cared about. It wasn't a long list. "Patricia," I called, "how many people know we're here tonight?" "Nobody," she called back. "Why?" "Because if we disappear, no one will look for us until Monday." She came back with an armload of flares. "So, what do we do?" I looked at the shadow people surrounding us. They were patient, I'd give them that. They could wait longer than we could stay awake. But I had an idea. "We're going to give them what they want," I said. Patricia stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "We're going to what?" "Trust me," I said, pulling out my camera. It was an old Polaroid, the kind that develops pictures instantly. "I need you to take a picture of me. Gabriel, this is not the time for photographs. It is exactly the time. The shadow people exist in photographs, right? They show up in pictures even when you can't see them directly." Patricia looked confused, but she took the camera. "Okay, but I don't understand." "When you take the picture, I'm going to step into the darkness for just a second. Let them grab my shadow. But then I'll step back into the light before they can get me." "That's insane. What if they don't let you go?" "They will, because they'll have what they want, my shadow in the photograph. But I'll still be alive to tell people what really happened here." It was a crazy plan, but it was the only thing I could think of. The flares wouldn't last forever, and we couldn't stay awake indefinitely. "On 3, I said. 1, 2. On 3, I stepped out of the floodlights and into the darkness, where my shadow was waiting. For just a moment, I felt something cold and terrible grab onto me, trying to pull me deeper into the dark. I could hear my own voice promising me peace, rest, an end to the insomnia that had plagued me for 43 years. But Patricia's camera flashed, and I stepped back into the light. The shadow people were gone. All of them vanished, like they'd never been there. I looked down and saw that I had a shadow again, a normal shadow that moved when I moved. Patricia looked at the photograph as it developed. "Did it work?" Looked at the picture. It showed me stepping into darkness, and standing right behind me was the shadow version of myself. But in the photo, the shadow looked satisfied, complete. "I think so," I said. We waited until dawn, keeping the floodlights on and taking turns staying awake. When the sun came up, everything felt normal again. Birds singing, insects buzzing, all the usual forest sounds. The college kids were found later that day by a day patrol, sleeping peacefully by the old stone bridge. They claimed they'd had the best night's sleep of their lives and couldn't remember anything unusual happening. Patricia and I filed our reports, but we kept them simple. Equipment malfunction at the ranger station, routine patrol, nothing unusual to report. The photo I kept to myself. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, there haven't been any more drained families found in the park. The shadow people seem to be satisfied, at least for now. Patricia thinks I traded my shadow for everyone's safety, and maybe she's right. I still work nights, but things are different now. I can sleep during the day. First time in my life. It's like whatever was keeping me awake is gone. But sometimes, when I'm walking the trails, I catch glimpses of my shadow doing things I'm not doing. Moving independently, waving at things I can't see. It's still connected to me, but it's not entirely mine anymore. I've been thinking about retiring. Maybe moving to a city where there's so much light you never see proper shadows. But I know it wouldn't matter. Wherever I go, my shadow will follow. And sometimes, late at night when I'm finally able to sleep, I dream about the shadow people. They're still out there in the darkness, patient as death, waiting for their next feeding time. The photo is locked in my safe at home. Sometimes I take it out and look at it. The shadow behind me in the picture seems more solid each time, more real. And lately I swear it's been looking back at me. Patricia says I should destroy the photograph, burn it, and scatter the ashes. But I can't. It's the only proof of what happened, the only evidence that the shadow people are real. Besides, I have a feeling that destroying the photo wouldn't get rid of my shadow. It would just make it angry. So I keep the picture, and I keep working nights, and I keep watching the shadows in Shenandoah National Park. Because someone has to. Someone has to know what's really out there in the dark. And if you're ever camping in the mountains and your shadow starts moving wrong, don't ignore it. Get to bright light immediately. Call for help. Do whatever you have to do, because the shadow people are patient, but they're always hungry. And next time, I might not be able to save you. My name is Ezekiel Mountain View, and I've been mapping caves for 16 years. Most folks think that's a strange way to make a living, crawling around in the dark under tons of rock. But there's something peaceful about the caves beneath Cumberland Gap. At least, there used to be. November of 1989 was when everything changed. The weather had turned cold early that year, and ice was already forming around the cave entrances. I remember thinking how quiet it was that morning when I got the call from dispatch. A tour group hadn't come out of Mammoth Chamber. 8 people, including 2 kids. I'd been doing cave rescue for most of my career. Started when my younger brother Tommy got trapped in a cave-in when we were teenagers. I got him out that day, but the experience stuck with me. Made me want to help other people who found themselves lost in the dark. Never thought I'd be the one needing rescue. The call came in around dawn. I grabbed my gear, my trusty Petzl helmet with the carbide lamp, 200 feet of dynamic rope, my descender, and the emergency radio that barely worked underground anyway. The tour group had gone down the previous afternoon with Jake Morrison, one of the local guides. Good man, knew these caves almost as well as I did. Cumberland Gap has over 50 miles of mapped passages. I'd explored most of them myself, sketching out the tunnels on paper, measuring distances, marking dangerous spots. The limestone here is old, formed millions of years ago when this whole area was under an ancient sea. Makes for stable caves mostly. The Mammoth Chamber sits about 400 feet down, connected to the surface by a series of natural shafts and passages that early settlers used during the Civil War. I met Sheriff Dawkins at the main entrance around 7 in the morning. He looked worried, which wasn't like him. Found their cars still in the parking area, he said, pointing to a cluster of vehicles covered in frost. Jake's truck, too. Nobody's answering when we call down the entrance. I clipped my lamp to my helmet and tested the beam. The light cut through the morning mist that was rising from the cave mouth. Even from the surface, I could feel the temperature difference. Caves in this area stay around 55 degrees year-round, while the outside air was pushing 30. I'll rappel down to the chamber, I told him. Check on them. Guide them back up if they're just lost or injured. The sheriff nodded, but something in his eyes made me pause. "Zeke," he said, using the nickname I'd had since childhood, "there's something else. When we called down this morning, we heard sounds, not voices, something else." I shrugged it off. Caves make all kinds of noises: water dripping, rock settling, wind moving through passages. After 16 years underground, I'd heard it all. Or so I thought. The descent into Mammoth Chamber takes about 20 minutes if you know what you're doing. I've made the trip hundreds of times, guiding my rope through the same anchor points, following the same route through passages that Daniel Boone himself might have walked. The cave system here is like an old friend. Familiar, predictable, safe. About halfway down, I noticed the temperature was off. Usually, you feel the cave's coolness as soon as you drop below the surface layer. But this morning, the air felt warm. Not uncomfortable, but wrong for November. I checked my thermometer, 68 degrees. That was at least 10 degrees warmer than normal. I called up to the sheriff through the shaft opening. "Temperature's running high down here. Might be a thermal spring acting up." But even as I said it, I knew that didn't make sense. These caves had been stable for as long as anyone could remember. The passages leading to Mammoth Chamber are narrow, and places wide enough for one person with a pack. I'd walked them so many times I could do it blindfolded. But that morning something felt different. The rock walls seemed to glisten more than usual, and there was a smell I couldn't place, like sulfur mixed with something rotting. When I finally reached the chamber, I found them. All 8 members of the tour group were there, along with Jake. But they weren't lost or injured. They were dead, and they'd died hard. The scene in my headlamp beam was something I still see when I close my eyes. The bodies were arranged in a rough circle in the center of Mammoth Chamber, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what had happened to them. It looked like they'd been dissolved from the inside out. Their clothes were intact, but the flesh underneath was gone, leaving behind hollow shells that had collapsed in on themselves. I'd seen drowning victims, people who'd fallen from cliffs, even folks who'd been caught in cave-ins. But this was different. This was impossible. Jake Morrison lay closest to the chamber entrance, his guide's jacket still zipped up, his flashlight still clutched in what remained of his hand. Whatever had killed them, it had been systematic, thorough. I forced myself to document the scene, taking notes like I'd been trained. But my hands were shaking as I wrote, and not from the cold. The chamber temperature was pushing 70 degrees now, way warmer than it should be. That's when I noticed the walls. Mammoth Chamber is a natural limestone formation carved by water over thousands of years. The walls are smooth in places, rough in others, but always predictable. I'd been in this chamber maybe 100 times over the years. I knew every stalactite, every formation. But now there were scratches in the rock. Deep gouges that ran from floor to ceiling, like something with massive claws had been sharpening them on the limestone. The scratches were fresh. I could see white limestone dust on the chamber floor beneath them. I ran my finger along one of the gouges. It was smooth, like it had been cut by something incredibly sharp. But limestone isn't soft rock. Whatever made these marks had to be harder than steel. The radio crackled in my pack. "Zeke, you find them?" Sheriff Dawkins' voice was distorted by the rock between us, but I could make out the words. "Found them," I called back. "All dead. I need the coroner down here and probably the state police. This isn't an accident." "What happened to them?" I looked around the chamber again, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "I don't know. Something dissolved them, from the inside." Static filled the radio for a long moment, then, "Say again?" "I said they're dissolved. Clothes are fine, but everything else—" I couldn't finish the sentence. I was about to start the climb back to the surface when my headlamp caught something else. On the far side of the chamber, there was an opening in the wall that I'd never seen before. Not a crack or a natural formation. This was a tunnel, perfectly round, about 6 feet across. I walked over to investigate. The opening was smooth, like it had been bored through the rock by some kind of machine. But there were no tool marks, no signs of blasting or drilling, just smooth limestone walls that disappeared into darkness beyond my lamp's reach. The smell was stronger here, that sulfur and rot combination that made my stomach turn. And there was something else, something that made the hair on my neck stand up. The air moving through the tunnel was warm. Not just warm, hot. Like it was coming from somewhere deep, somewhere that shouldn't exist. I'd been mapping caves for 16 years. I knew every passage, every chamber, every dead-end tunnel in the Cumberland Gap system. This opening wasn't on any of my maps. It wasn't on any maps, period. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The tunnel stretched ahead, perfectly round, sloping gently downward. My footsteps echoed strangely, like the sound was being absorbed by something soft. After about 50 feet, the passage opened into another chamber, one that definitely wasn't supposed to be here. This chamber was larger than Mammoth, with a ceiling that disappeared beyond my light. The walls were slick with some kind of moisture that reflected my lamp beam. And there was something on the floor, a pile of what looked like shed skin, only bigger than any snake skin I'd ever seen. Much bigger. I knelt down to examine it. The skin was thick, almost leathery, with a pattern of scales that looked more like armor than anything natural. It was maybe 20 feet long and wide enough that I couldn't reach across it with my arms spread. That's when I heard the sound. It came from somewhere deeper in the chamber, a wet sliding noise like something heavy being dragged across wet rock. I froze, holding my breath, listening. The sound came again. Closer this time. I switched off my lamp and stood in complete darkness, trying to locate the source of the noise by sound alone. It was a technique I'd learned from my Cherokee grandfather. Sometimes you hear better when you can't see. The sliding sound circled around me, moving along the walls of the chamber. Whatever was making it was big. I could feel vibrations in the rock floor through my boots, and it was getting closer. I clicked my lamp back on and swept the beam around the chamber. For just a second, I caught a glimpse of something moving along the far wall, something massive and pale that disappeared into the shadows faster than I could focus on it. My hands found my rope and gear without conscious thought. 16 years of cave rescue had trained me to react fast in dangerous situations. But as I started backing toward the tunnel entrance, I realized something that made my blood turn cold. The opening I'd come through was gone. Where the tunnel mouth had been, there was now solid limestone wall, smooth and unbroken, like the opening had never existed at all. I ran my hands over the wall where the tunnel had been, feeling for any crack or seam that might indicate a hidden passage. Nothing. Just solid rock that was warm to the touch, like something was heating it from the other side. The sliding sound had stopped, but I could feel eyes on me, or something like eyes. I spun my headlamp beam around the chamber, searching for whatever was sharing this space with me. The light caught the pile of shed skin again, and I noticed something I'd missed before. There were more skins underneath, layers of them, like something had been molting here for years. Decades, maybe. My radio crackled with static. I grabbed it, hoping for contact with the surface, but all I got was white noise. The rock was too thick, or maybe something was interfering with the signal. Either way, I was on my own. I forced myself to think like the professional I was supposed to be. Cave-ins happened. Passages shifted. There had to be another way out. I'd never heard of a cave system with only one entrance, especially not in limestone country. Water carved these caves, and water always found more than one way through rock. I started exploring the chamber systematically, keeping the wall to my right, moving clockwise around the perimeter. My lamp beam revealed more scratch marks in the stone, the same deep gouges I'd seen in Mammoth Chamber, but older. Some of them were worn smooth, like they'd been made years ago. About halfway around the chamber, I found another tunnel opening. This one was different, rougher, more natural looking. It sloped upward, which gave me hope. Maybe it connected to a passage I recognized, something that would get me back to familiar territory. The tunnel was tight, barely wide enough for my shoulders. I had to take off my pack and push it ahead of me as I crawled. The rock was still warm, and that sulfur smell was getting stronger, but it was the only way forward, so I kept going. And after maybe 100 feet of crawling, the passage opened into a smaller chamber. I stood up, stretching muscles that were cramping from the tight space, and swept my light around to get my bearings. I wasn't alone. Rick Belmont sat with his back against the far wall, his caving helmet tilted at an odd angle. Rick was a fellow spelunker, someone I'd worked with on several rescues over the years. A good man who knew caves almost as well as I did. "Rick!" I called out, jogging toward him. "Jesus, man, what are you doing down here? How did you get—" I stopped when my light hit his face. Rick was staring straight ahead with wide, terrified eyes. His mouth was open in a silent scream, and his skin had a waxy, translucent quality that reminded me too much of the tour group. He'd been dead for days, maybe weeks, but that was impossible. I'd seen Rick just last Tuesday at Manny's Diner in town. We'd talked about his plans to explore some new passages in the eastern section of the cave system. I knelt beside him, checking for any signs of life, even though I knew it was hopeless. His skin was cold despite the warm air in the chamber. No pulse, no breathing. Whatever had killed the tour group had gotten Rick too. But when had he come down here? And why? I found his cave pack beside him, still organized the way Rick always kept it. Methodical guy, neat to a fault. His logbook was in the front pocket, wrapped in waterproof plastic. I opened it to the last entry. November 3rd. Exploring new passages in eastern quadrant. Found unusual rock formations, possibly thermal activity. Temperature readings abnormal. Something's not right down here. November 3rd. That was 2 weeks ago. But I'd seen Rick last Tuesday, which would have been November 7th. 4 days after this entry was made. I flipped back through earlier entries, looking for some explanation. Rick had been exploring parts of the cave system I'd never mapped, following passages that led deeper than anyone had gone before. His notes mentioned finding constructed tunnels, passages that seemed too perfect to be natural, but showed no tool marks or signs of human excavation. The same kind of tunnel I'd found leading away from Mammoth Chamber. A sound echoed through the chamber, that same wet sliding I'd heard before, but louder now, closer. I grabbed Rick's pack and mine, stuffing the logbook into my jacket. Whatever was down here, it had killed Rick and the tour group, and it was looking for me next. I found another passage leading out of Rick's chamber, this one sloping sharply downward. I didn't want to go deeper, but the sliding sound was coming from the direction I'd entered, cutting off my retreat. As I started down the passage, my light caught something carved into the wall near the entrance. Symbols that looked old, really old, not Native American, not settler scratches. Something else entirely. The marks were burned into the stone, not carved, like they'd been made with acid. The passage spiraled downward for what felt like hours. My watch had stopped working, the hands frozen at 9:17. The deeper I went, the warmer it got, until I was sweating inside my jacket. The sulfur smell was overwhelming now, making my eyes water. Finally, the passage opened into the largest chamber I'd ever seen. My headlamp beam couldn't reach the far walls or the ceiling. The floor was covered with more shed skins, dozens of them, ranging in size from maybe 10 feet to ones that looked 40 feet long or more. And in the center of the chamber, coiled around what looked like a natural stone pillar, was the thing that had been hunting me. It was like a worm, but bigger than any earthworm had a right to be. 40 feet long at least, 6 feet thick, with segments like a giant grub. Its skin was pale and translucent, and I could see things moving inside it. Partially dissolved shapes that might once have been human. The creature's head was nothing but a massive mouth, filled with rotating rows of teeth that looked like they were made of diamond or crystal. As I watched, frozen in terror, it opened that mouth and sprayed a stream of liquid that hit the stone pillar and started eating through the rock like it was butter. Acid. The thing was full of acid. It turned toward me, and I saw that it had no eyes, just heat-sensing pits along the sides of its head. But it knew exactly where I was. It had probably been tracking me since I first entered its domain. The creature uncoiled from the pillar and started sliding toward me with surprising speed. I ran. I ran through passages I didn't recognize, my headlamp beam bouncing wildly as I stumbled over loose rock and squeezed through openings barely wide enough for my body. Behind me, I could hear the creature moving through its tunnel system. A wet, sliding sound punctuated by the hiss of acid eating through stone. It was faster than me, much faster. The passage I was following opened into another chamber, this one filled with old mining equipment. Wooden support beams, rusted pickaxes, and something that made my heart jump. Dynamite. Boxes of it, left behind from some long-ago mining operation that had tried to expand the cave system artificially. The dynamite looked old, maybe from the 1920s or 1930s, but it was stored in a dry part of the cave. There was a chance it might still work. I grabbed 2 sticks and a coil of fuse, stuffing them into my pack as the sound of the creature's approach got louder. My grandfather had taught me about mining explosives when I was a kid. Back then, a lot of folks in these mountains supplemented their income with small mining operations. The chamber had 3 exit passages. I took the middle one, hoping it would lead me back toward familiar territory. But after 100 yards, it dead-ended in a wall of solid rock. The second passage did the same thing. The creature was in the chamber now. I could hear it moving among the old mining equipment, probably following my scent. Or maybe the heat signature from my body. I'd read somewhere that some snakes would track warm-blooded prey that way. The third passage was my last chance. I followed it as quietly as I could, trying not to let my boots scrape against the stone. The passage wound upward, which gave me hope. Maybe it connected to something closer to the surface. After what felt like forever, I saw light ahead. Not electric light. Natural light filtering down from above. I'd found a connection to one of the main passages, somewhere between Mammoth Chamber and the surface. But as I climbed toward the light, I heard something that made my blood freeze. The creature wasn't behind me anymore. It was above me, in the passage I was trying to reach. The sliding sound was coming from directly overhead. I was trapped between the thing and a dead end. That's when I remembered something from Rick's logbook. He'd mentioned that the creature seemed to be territorial. It hunted within a specific area but didn't venture beyond certain boundaries. Maybe if I could get back to the main cave system, to passages it didn't consider part of its domain, I'd be safe. But first, I had to get past it. I pulled out the dynamite and fuse, my hands shaking as I tried to remember my grandfather's lessons. The creature was maybe 50 feet above me, blocking the only way out. If I could collapse part of the passage, create a barrier between us. The fuse was old, probably unreliable. I'd get one chance at this. I lit the fuse with my carbide lamp and tossed the dynamite up the passage toward where I thought the creature was waiting. Then I pressed myself against the wall and covered my head. The explosion was deafening in the confined space. Rock dust and debris rained down, and for a moment I thought I'd brought down the whole mountain on top of myself. But when the dust cleared, I was still alive. More importantly, the passage above me was blocked. Tons of limestone had collapsed, sealing off the creature's access route. I could hear it on the other side of the rock fall, making angry sounds, hissing and scraping against the stone barrier I'd created. But the explosion had also opened a new passage. Where the dynamite had gone off, it had blown a hole in the side wall, revealing another tunnel. This one had air moving through it, air that smelled like the surface world instead of sulfur and death. I climbed through the opening and found myself in a passage I recognized. It was part of the original cave system, one of the tunnels I'd mapped years ago. I was maybe 200 feet from Mammoth Chamber, which meant I was on the route back to the surface. I'd never been so happy to see familiar limestone walls. The climb back to the surface took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of checking over my shoulder, listening for any sound that might indicate the creature had found another way around the rockfall I'd created. But the passages stayed quiet, except for the normal sounds of a healthy cave system, water dripping, the occasional bat call, air moving through natural openings. When I finally saw Sheriff Dawkins's face at the cave entrance, I nearly broke down. The morning sun had never looked so good. They sealed Cumberland Gap Caves the next day. Official reason was structural instability following seismic activity. The sheriff backed up my story about finding the tour group, but we agreed to leave out certain details. Nobody would have believed the truth anyway. Rick Belmont was listed as a separate incident, a solo caver who'd gotten lost and died of exposure in an unmapped section of the system. They never found his body, which wasn't unusual in caves this complex. Sometimes people just disappear underground, and the mountain keeps its secrets. I tried to go back to cave rescue work, but something had changed. The first time I had to rappel into a cave system after Cumberland Gap, I lasted maybe 10 minutes before the walls started closing in on me. Panic attacks, the doctor called them. Severe claustrophobia brought on by traumatic stress. 16 years of cave work ended just like that. These days, I work construction above ground. Good, honest work under open sky where I can see the horizon. My wife says I sleep better now, don't wake up in the middle of the night talking about sliding sounds and acid burns. But sometimes, when the news reports another small earthquake in the Cumberland Gap area, I wonder if that rockfall really held. The creature was old. Older than the caves themselves, maybe. Something that had been living deep in the earth since before humans walked these mountains. The Cherokee have stories about such things. Monsters that live in the deep places. Things that are older than memory and hungrier than death. My grandfather used to tell those stories, but I never paid much attention. Wish I had. Last month, they found some hikers missing near the park. Their cars were still in the parking lot, just like before. The official search was called off after a week. No trace found. Probably fell into a sinkhole or got lost in the backcountry. But I know better. The caves under Cumberland Gap run deeper than any map shows, deeper than anyone has ever explored, and in the deepest places, in chambers that never see the light, old things are stirring. If you ever find yourself near Cumberland Gap, stick to the marked trails. Don't go wandering off into areas that aren't on the tourist maps. And if you hear stories about new cave openings, passages that weren't there before, warm spots in the ground where there shouldn't be any, just keep walking. Some caves go deeper than they should, and some things are better left sleeping in the dark. My name is Ezekiel Mountain View, and I'm telling you this because 16 years of mapping caves taught me one important lesson. The earth keeps secrets, and sometimes those secrets are better left buried. But the ground under Cumberland Gap has been shaking more often lately. Small tremors that the seismologists say are just natural settling. I know different. Something down there is still digging, still hungry, still growing. My name is Clayton Riverside, and I've been a forest ranger for 13 years. If you're new to my channel, you know I don't tell tall tales. What I'm about to share happened 2 years ago in the Daniel Boone National Forest, and I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about it. I patrol the remote sections near Cumberland Gap, Kentucky. It's wild country, thick forests, deep hollows, and plenty of places where cell phones don't work. Most folks avoid these parts, especially during hunting season. That's when my job gets busy, checking licenses and making sure hunters follow the rules. The mountains have always been my home. My daddy was a ranger, and his daddy before him. We Riversides know these hills better than most. I learned to track from Joseph Crow Feather, an old Cherokee elder who taught me to read the forest like a book. Every broken twig, every disturbed leaf tells a story. I carry a Winchester Model 70 rifle and my daddy's old 1911 Colt 45. In 13 years, I've faced down 3 black bears, survived 2 flash floods, and pulled more lost hikers out of trouble than I can count. Point is, I'm not the kind of man who scares easy. That changed in Hollering Hollow. The hollow got its name from the way wind screams through the valley during storms. It's an 8-mile deep cut in the mountains, surrounded by limestone caves and fed by underground streams. The Cherokee considered it sacred ground. Burial sites dot the ridges. During the Civil War, Union and Confederate soldiers fought a bloody skirmish there. The locals whisper about harvest spirits that guard the dead, but I never paid much mind to old mountain stories. October that year was unseasonably warm. Thick fog rolled through the valleys every morning, making visibility near impossible. The dirt road into Hollering Hollow washes out regularly, and that week it was especially bad. I had to hike, in on foot, carrying my radio and supplies in my backpack. I was checking on reports of illegal hunting in the area. Poaching's a serious problem. Some folks think the rules don't apply in remote places. They're wrong, and it's my job to prove it. The morning of October 23rd started normal enough. I radioed headquarters at dawn like always. Base, this is Ranger 47, starting patrol of Hollering Hollow. We'll check in every 30 minutes. Copy that, Clayton. Weather Service says fog should lift by noon. Stay safe out there. I shouldered my pack and headed into the mist. The forest felt wrong from the start, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Maybe it was too quiet. Usually you hear birds calling, squirrels chattering, insects buzzing. That morning, nothing. Just my boots crunching on wet leaves and my breathing in the thick air. 3 miles in, I found them. 5 men arranged in a perfect circle in a small clearing. At first glance, I thought they were sleeping around a dead campfire. Then I got closer and saw the blood. They'd been gutted like deer, clean cuts, professional work, but that wasn't the worst part. Someone had somehow attached deer antlers to their skulls, real antlers, grown right into the bone like they'd been there for years. The bodies faced east toward the rising sun, arms positioned like scarecrows. I'd seen plenty of hunting accidents, bear attacks, even a few murders in my time. This was different. This was ritualistic. My hands shook as I reached for my radio. Protocol was clear. Secure the scene, call it in, wait for backup. But when I pressed the transmit button instead of headquarters, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Cherokee death chants, low and mournful, coming through the static. I tried different channels, same thing. Ancient voices singing in a language I didn't understand, but somehow knew meant death. That's when I noticed the complete silence around me. No wind, no insects. Even my own breathing seemed muffled. The fog hung motionless between the trees like curtains, and somewhere in that gray emptiness, I felt eyes watching me. I checked my compass to get my bearings. The needle spun wildly, never settling on any direction. My GPS unit showed my location as the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Something was very wrong in Hollering Hollow, and I was 8 miles from the nearest road with no way to call for help. I forced myself to stay calm and do my job. These men were someone's sons, fathers, brothers. They deserved proper treatment, whatever had happened to them. I started with photos, using my old Polaroid camera. The flash seemed too bright in the gray morning, and each picture came out wrong. In every shot, shadows fell the wrong way, like the sun was shining from below instead of above. The victims all carried hunting rifles and wore camouflage. Their licenses were in order, but the season didn't open for another week. Poachers, just like I'd suspected. But who would do this to them, and how? I knelt beside the nearest body to examine the antlers. They weren't attached with wire or glue. They'd grown from the skull like they belonged there. The bone had healed around them, smooth and natural. Impossible, but I was looking right at it. That's when I heard the footsteps. Someone was walking through the fog, coming toward the clearing. Heavy boots on wet leaves, moving slow and steady. I drew my pistol and called out, "Kentucky Forest Service, identify yourself!" The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched for maybe 30 seconds. Then a voice answered from the mist. "Clayton? That you, buddy?" I relaxed. I knew that voice, Jake Millstone, my partner. He must have gotten worried when I missed my radio check and hiked in to find me. "Jake, over here! We got a situation!" He stepped out of the fog and my relief died in my throat. Jake looked wrong. His uniform was torn and dirty, covered in what looked like dried mud. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated like he'd been drinking or worse. And he was grinning, a wide, unnatural smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Found some hunters, did you?" Jake's voice sounded strange, like an echo coming from far away. "Been hunting out of season, I bet." "Jake, are you all right? You look..." "I look what, Clayton?" That terrible grin got wider. "I look dead? Like these boys here?" He gestured at the bodies, and I noticed his hand was covered in scratches and cuts. Fresh ones, still bleeding. "Where's your radio? Your truck? How did you get here?" Jake tilted his head like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. "Truck's back at the road. Radio's busted. Just like yours, I'm betting." I tried my radio again. Still nothing but death chants. "We need to hike out, get help from town," I said. "This is way beyond what we can handle." "Oh, I don't think we're going anywhere, Clayton, not yet. The harvest isn't finished." The way he said harvest made my skin crawl. I'd known Jake for 5 years. We'd worked dozens of cases together. This wasn't the man I knew. "Jake, what happened to you out there?" He laughed, and the sound was like branches breaking. "Happened to me? Nothing happened to me. I just learned the rules is all. Mountains got rules, Clayton. Old rules. Cherokee knew them. These boys here forgot them." He kicked at one of the bodies with his boot. "Season doesn't open for a week, but they came hunting anyway. Thought the rules didn't apply to them. The mountain showed them different." "The mountain didn't do this, Jake. Someone killed these men. Someone sick and twisted. And if we don't, look around you, Clayton. Really look." I did. The fog seemed thicker now, pressing in on all sides. The trees looked different somehow, twisted, bent at wrong angles. And the silence was complete, except for our voices and those damn chants still coming from my radio. "How long you think you've been standing here?" Jake asked. I checked my watch. It should have been around 8 in the morning. The hands pointed to midnight. "That's not right. It was dawn when I found them." Time moves different in Hollering Hollow during harvest season, always has. Cherokee knew that too. I backed away from him slowly. Whatever had happened to Jake, whatever was wrong with this place, I needed to get out. Now. The Cherokee also knew how to appease the mountain, Jake continued, following my movement. Blood for blood, life for life. These boys took deer out of season. Mountain took them. "You're talking crazy, Jake. You ever wonder why your daddy never hunted in Hollering Hollow? Why his daddy didn't? Why the old-timers always warned folks away during harvest season?" I hadn't thought about it, but now that he mentioned it, it was true. 3 generations of Riversides had patrolled these mountains, but none of us ever hunted here. Family tradition, Daddy always said. Respect for the dead. "Your family knew the rules, Clayton, but you forgot them. You've been hunting here for years, taking deer, turkey, rabbits. Mountain's been patient, but patience has limits." My blood went cold. He was right. I'd hunted in Hollering Hollow plenty of times. Never thought twice about it. "That's different. I follow the seasons. I have licenses." Jake's grin widened until it didn't look human anymore. "White man's seasons. White man's licenses. Mountain don't recognize those. Mountain's got older laws." Behind him, in the fog, I saw movement. Shadows that didn't match the trees. And slowly, impossibly, the 5 dead men began to stand up. The dead hunters rose like marionettes on invisible strings. Their heads lolled at wrong angles, and the antlers had grown longer, branching into full racks. They still faced east, but now their eyes were open, black holes that seemed to pull light into them. I ran. Behind me, Jake laughed that terrible breaking branch sound. "Can't run from the harvest, Clayton. Mountain's got your scent now." I crashed through, the fog, branches whipping at my face. My compass spun wildly, but I knew these woods by heart, or thought I did. Every trail I tried led back to the clearing. Every path circled around on itself. After what felt like hours but was probably minutes, I stopped to catch my breath beside a fallen log. My radio crackled to life. "Clayton? Clayton, can you hear me?" It was Jake's voice, but different. Scared. Normal. "Jake! Where are you?" "I don't know. I've been walking for hours. Something's wrong with this place, Clayton. The trees keep moving, and there are voices in the fog. Singing. I'm in the hollow, near the clearing with the dead hunters. Yeah, I found them too. Jesus, Clayton, what happened to them?" This was the Jake I knew. Confused, frightened, but himself. Not the grinning thing that had talked about mountain laws. "Jake, listen to me. We need to get out of here. Can you see your truck?" I thought I could, but when I walked toward it, it moved away, like a mirage. And Clayton? I found tracks, leading away from the clearing. What kind of tracks? Started human. But they change as they go, get longer, wider, end up looking like, I don't know, like something that walks on roots instead of feet. The radio hissed with static, then Jake's voice came back, panicked. "It's here! Oh God, it's coming through the trees! It's huge, Clayton! It's..." The transmission cut to Cherokee death chants again. I keyed the radio frantically. "Jake, Jake, respond!" Nothing but singing voices and static. I was truly alone now. I started walking again, trying to find some landmark I recognized. The fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. That's when I noticed the footprints in the mud, my own boots, clear as day in the soft earth. But according to my watch, I'd made them 3 days ago. I knelt down and touched the prints. The mud was still wet, still fresh. Time didn't work right in Hollering Hollow. I followed my own trail backwards, hoping it would lead me out. Instead, it brought me to a ranger station I'd never seen before, small log. Building, Forest Service signs, generator humming outside. Light glowed warm and yellow in the windows. I knew every building in my territory. This one didn't exist. But the generator was running. Maybe there was a radio inside that worked. Maybe someone who could help. The door opened before I could knock. An old Cherokee man stood there, wearing a ranger uniform from the 1950s. I recognized him from faded photographs in the main office. Joseph Crow Feather's grandfather, the first Native American ranger hired in Kentucky. He'd died in 1962. "You shouldn't have come here during harvest season," he said in perfect English. "Especially not you, Clayton Riverside." "You know me?" "I knew your great-grandfather. Good man. Respectful man." He understood the old agreements. "What agreements?" "The Cherokee who lived here made a deal with the mountain spirit before they were forced to leave. Blood for blood, life for life. The mountain would protect the sacred burial grounds. In return, certain laws had to be followed during harvest season." He gestured for me to come inside. The station was equipped with old-style radios and maps from decades ago. Everything looked real, solid. "Your great-grandfather was there when the agreement was made. He promised his family would help enforce it. That promise bound the Riverside line to the mountain." "I don't understand." "The harvest spirit only takes those who violate the old laws. Poachers, out-of-season hunters, those who kill pregnant does or destroy nests. Your family was supposed to prevent that, to keep people away during harvest season. We do. I check licenses, enforce hunting laws, white man's laws." He shook his head sadly. "The mountain recognizes older authority. You've been hunting here yourself, Clayton, for years. You broke the agreement." My legs gave out. I sat down hard on an old wooden chair. But I followed. The rules. State regulations. Seasons. This valley is sacred ground. No hunting allowed, ever. Your great-grandfather knew that. Your grandfather forgot. Your father never learned. And you... He looked at me with pity. "You've fed yourself from sacred lands for 13 years." Outside, something roared. Not an animal sound. Deeper, older, like the earth itself screaming. "It's coming," the old ranger said. "The harvest spirit. It gave you time to learn the truth. But time's up." The lights in the station flickered and died. The generator coughed and fell silent. In the darkness, I heard footsteps on the porch. Heavy. Slow. Each step made the building shake. "There is one way," the old man whispered. "If you truly understand what you've done. If you're willing to make amends." The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. Through the opening came something that had once been alive, but was now composed of twisted vines and branches. It stood 12 feet tall, with a deer skull for a head and antlers that scraped the ceiling. Its eyes were glowing maple leaves, and its hands were gnarled root systems that reached toward me. The harvest spirit had found me at last. The thing that stepped through the doorway wasn't quite plant and wasn't quite animal. Thick vines wrapped around what might have been bones, forming a roughly human shape. Moss and bark covered its body like skin, and small branches grew from its shoulders and arms. The deer skull head tilted at me, and those maple leaf eyes burned orange like autumn fire. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once. The walls, the floor, the air itself. "Clayton Riverside, third-generation oath breaker. Your time of judgment has come." The old ranger stepped between us, and I realized I could see through him like mist. "Tell him the choice, grandfather," he said to the spirit. "Tell him the old ways. Let's..." Harvest spirit moved closer. Its root fingers scraped across the floor, leaving deep grooves in the wood. You have taken life from sacred ground for 13 years. Deer, turkey, rabbits, all under my protection. The penalty is to join them, to become part of the eternal hunt, forever pursued as you pursued them. Those root hands reached for my head. I could see how they would penetrate my skull, how the antlers would grow from the bone, how I'd become another scarecrow guardian in the clearing. But, the spirit continued, and I felt a spark of hope. Your great-grandfather's service earned your bloodline one chance at redemption. You can choose to honor the old agreement, become its guardian instead of its victim. What does that mean? Give up hunting forever. Never again take life in any forest. Spend your remaining years protecting the sacred places, warning others away during harvest season. Accept the Cherokee way. The alternative was clear in those burning leaf eyes. Join the eternal hunt as prey, or spend my life preventing others from making my mistake. It shouldn't have been a hard choice, but I'd been hunting since I was 8 years old. It was in my blood, part of who I was. Giving it up would mean becoming a different person entirely. I need time to think, I said. The spirit's skull head tilted the other way. Time is ended. Choose now. Outside, I heard Jake's voice screaming in the fog. The harvest spirit heard it too. Your partner learned too late. He tried to warn you, to save you, but the mountain took him first. His warnings became my words. My heart sank. The Jake I'd talked to on the radio, the frightened one begging for help, that had been the real Jake, being consumed by the forest. The grinning thing in the clearing had been the spirit wearing his face, trying to make me understand. He's dead? He serves now, as will you, one way or another. The root fingers touched my temples, and I felt them starting to dig into the skin. Pain shot through my skull as something began to grow beneath the bone. Wait, I gasped. I choose to serve. The fingers stopped, but didn't withdraw. Swear it, by the sacred earth and the bones of the dead. I swear by the sacred earth and the bones of the dead, I'll never hunt again. I'll protect the sacred places. I'll warn people away during harvest season. And if you break this oath? The pain in my head intensified, showing me what waited if I failed. I become part of the eternal hunt. I understand. The harvest spirit released me and stepped back. The deer skull nodded once. The Cherokee way is mercy through justice. You have learned. You will serve. It turned and walked back through the broken doorway. As it left, the old ranger began to fade. Remember Clayton Riverside. The mountain is always watching, always listening. Then I was alone in the dark station. I stumbled outside as dawn broke over the mountains. Real dawn this time. I could tell by the way the light fell naturally through the trees. My watch showed 6 in the morning, October 24th. I'd lost a whole day. The path back to the clearing was obvious now, no longer hidden by fog and confusion. I found Jake there, or what was left of him. He'd been arranged with the other hunters, facing east with antlers growing from his skull. But his eyes were still human, still aware. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry, Jake. His lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. But I understood. He was trying to warn me, still trying to save me, even in death. I hiked out of Hollering Hollow as fast as I could. My truck was where I'd left it, and my radio worked perfectly once I got out of the valley. Base, this is Ranger 47. I need state police and the coroner at Hollering Hollow. Multiple fatalities. Copy, Clayton. What happened out there? You've been out of contact for over a day. Bear attack, I lied. Real bad one. The state police found 6 bodies in the clearing, Orang. Ed in a circle. The official report listed cause of death as bear attack, despite the obvious problems with that theory. Nobody wanted to explain the antlers or the ritualistic positioning. Sometimes the simple answer is the one that lets people sleep at night. Jake's funeral was closed casket. I was a pallbearer, along with 5 other rangers who'd known him for years. His wife asked me what really happened out there. I told her he died trying to save people, which was true enough. I kept my promise to the harvest spirit. I turned in my hunting licenses that same week, told everyone I was going vegetarian for health reasons, sold my rifles to a collector in Louisville, even got rid of my daddy's .45, though that broke my heart. My job changed too. Instead of just checking licenses and enforcing state laws, I started warning people away from certain areas during harvest season. Hollering Hollow, Devil's Fork, Morning Ridge, all the places where Cherokee burial sites dotted the hills. Most folks listened when I told them those areas were dangerous. Some didn't. Every October, a few hunters went missing in the sacred valleys. Their bodies turned up eventually, arranged in circles, sprouting antlers like trees. I retired early, at 42. Couldn't stand patrolling those mountains anymore, knowing what watched from the shadows. The new rangers think I burned out after Jake's death. They're not wrong. I moved to town and opened a small shop selling outdoor gear. No hunting equipment, just camping and hiking supplies. I tell everyone who'll listen about the importance of respecting nature, following the rules, staying out of certain places during certain seasons. They think I'm just another old mountain man with too many stories. But every October, when the fog rolls through the valleys and the leaves turn red as blood, I remember the harvest spirit's words. The mountain is always watching, always listening. And sometimes, on quiet autumn nights, I hear Cherokee death chants carried on the wind. Last week, a young hunter came into my shop looking for suppimyems, lies. Said he'd heard about great deer hunting in Hollering Hollow, wanted to get a head start on the season. I told him the same thing I tell them all. Some places aren't meant for hunting, son. Some places are meant for remembering the dead. You'd do well to find somewhere else. He laughed and bought his supplies from the sporting goods store in Lexington instead. I hope he listens. I hope they all listen, because the harvest spirit is patient, but patience has limits, and the mountain never forgets a debt. If you're planning to hunt in Kentucky this fall, stay out of the sacred valleys. Respect the old agreements. Follow the Cherokee way. The mountain is always watching, always listening, and harvest season never really ends. My name is Clayton Riverside, and that's what happened in Hollering Hollow. I've told you the truth as I lived it. What you do with that truth is up to you. Just remember, some rules are older than laws, some debts are paid in blood, and some promises bind your children's children. The harvest never ends. My name is Jeremiah Stormcrow, and I've been working these mountains since 1967. 18 years of pulling people out of trouble in Jefferson National Forest. Most folks call me Storm. I'm good at what I do. Rescued 47 people during my time here. But what happened on Devil's Backbone in February of '85 still keeps me awake at night. I'm 44 now, half Cherokee, half Irish. Got the worst of both sides. My grandmother's stubborn streak and my father's quick temper. Spent 2 tours in Vietnam, crawling through tunnels smaller than coffins. Came home and figured the mountains would be peaceful. Shows what I knew. That morning started like any other. Ice storm had hit us hard the night before. Power lines down everywhere. Roads slick as glass. I was checking my gear in the ranger station when the call came through on my old military radio. "Storm, we got 6 ice climbers missing on Devil's Backbone," said dispatch. Last contact was yesterday around noon. Devil's Backbone. 12 miles of ridgeline with cliff faces that drop straight down 300 feet. Not a place you want to be when the weather turns mean. The Cherokee called it something else, a word that means where the spirits hunt. My grandmother used to warn me about things that lived up there. Skinwalkers, she called them. Things that steal faces and walk in borrowed skin. I never believed those old stories. The wind was howling something fierce when I loaded my gear. Rope, medical kit, emergency radio, flares. Everything I needed for a standard search and rescue. I threw in some extra batteries and started up the mountain in my Jeep. The drive took 2 hours on roads that should have been closed. Ice hung from every tree branch like glass teeth. When I reached the trailhead, I could see fresh tire tracks. The missing climbers had parked their van right where they were supposed to. Good sit. Gian, maybe they just got weather-bound and holed up somewhere safe. I strapped on my snowshoes and started up the trail. 3 miles to the ridge, then I'd follow it east until I found them. The ice made everything look different. Trees bent under the weight, branches snapping in the wind. Every step forward was work. That's when I heard it. A voice calling from somewhere up ahead. "Help! Someone help us!" I stopped, listening hard. The voice came again, clearer this time. A woman, scared and cold. "We're down here, please." I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, I've got contact with the missing party. About 2 miles up Devil's Backbone Trail." "Copy that, Storm. Be careful up there." I picked up my pace, following the voice. It seemed to come from the cliff edge, which made sense if they'd gotten stuck on the rock face. Ice climbers sometimes get trapped when the weather changes fast. But something felt wrong. The voice was too clear, too strong for someone who'd been out in this cold for over a day. And there was something else. An echo that didn't match the terrain. When I reached the cliff edge and looked down, my blood went cold. 6 people hanging on the rock face, perfectly spaced about 50 feet apart. They were all wearing bright climbing gear, red, blue, yellow jackets that stood out against the gray stone. Their ropes looked good, gear looked solid, but none of them were moving. I called out, "Hey, can you hear me?" No answer. I got closer to the edge and looked again. That's when I saw their faces. They were all looking up at me with wide, staring eyes, mouths open like they were still calling for help. But they'd been dead for hours, maybe since yesterday. The cold had frozen them in place, but something else was wrong with the scene. Their climbing ropes showed no signs of failure. The gear was all placed correctly. These were experienced climbers, I could tell from their setup. But they hung there like they'd just stopped climbing and died where they were. And the bite marks. Even from up top, I could see the torn clothing, the dark stains on the rock below each body. Something had been feeding on them while they hung there helpless. I'd seen a lot of bad things in Vietnam and 18 years of mountain rescue, but this was different. This felt evil. I radioed for backup and started setting up my rappel gear. Whatever had killed these people, I needed to get down there and document the scene. Maybe one of them was still alive. The wind kept getting stronger as I rigged my ropes. Every gust tried to push me away from the cliff edge. My hands were already getting numb despite my gloves. "Storm to base, starting my descent now. Weather's getting bad up here." "Copy. Rescue team will be there in 3 hours." 3 hours. In this weather, it might as well be 3 days. I clipped into my rope and started down. The ice made everything slippery. Each time I pushed off the rock face, my boots would slide instead of grip. About halfway down to the first body, I started hearing things. Voices, familiar voices. "Storm, wait up." That sounded like Dave Northwind, my usual climbing partner, but Dave was back at the station today. "Down here, Storm. We need help." A woman's voice, but not one of the climbers I could see hanging on the rock. I stopped my descent and looked around. The voices seemed to come from empty air. Sound bounces weird in the mountains, especially with ice everywhere. I kept going down. The first body was a young woman in a red jacket. When I got close enough to check for a pulse, I saw what had been done to her. Bite marks covered her arms and legs, human-sized bites, but the teeth marks were wrong, too sharp, too many. And mixed in with them were what looked like claw marks. No pulse. She'd been dead for hours, but her eyes tracked to me when I moved. Just the ice, I told myself. Dead eyes can't follow anything. I moved to the next body, a man in blue. Same story. Bite marks, claw marks, and something else that made my stomach turn. Parts of him were missing, eaten, but the wounds were too clean, too precise, like something had been taking its time, keeping him alive while it fed. That's when I found the rope. Between the second and third body, there was an extra line hanging down the cliff. A rope that wasn't in any of the photos the climbers had posted on their permit. It was anchored above me somewhere, and when I followed it up with my eyes, I couldn't see the top, but I could see something moving up there. A dark shape against the gray sky. "Dave, that you up there?" I called. The shape moved closer to the edge. For just a second, I saw a face looking down at me. My face. Same dark hair, same Cherokee features, same scar on my left cheek from a climbing accident 5 years ago. I blinked and it was gone. My radio crackled. "Storm, you all right down there? Your voice sounds funny." I hadn't said anything on the radio. "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied. "Just documenting the scene. These people have been partially eaten by something. I need that rescue team now." "Copy. Dave's on his way with the truck." Dave. But I'd just seen Dave looking down at me from the cliff top, or something that looked like Dave. My hands started shaking as I moved to the third body. This one was different. A man in a yellow jacket, but when I got close, I could see that his jacket wasn't just yellow. It was covered in something that looked like shed skin. Thin, translucent pieces that fluttered in the wind like old paper. I touched one of the pieces. It was warm. That's impossible. Everything up here was frozen solid. But this skin, because that's what it was, human skin, was warm to the touch. And when I held it up to the light, I could see fingerprints on it. My fingerprints. I dropped the skin, and it blew away in the wind. This was getting too strange. I needed to finish checking the bodies and get out of here. Bodies 4 and 5 were more of the same. Bite marks, missing pieces, and that warm shed skin caught on their gear. But body 6, the last one on the east end of the cliff, was gone. The rope was still there, the gear was still clipped to the rock, but the harness was empty, just hanging there like whoever had been in it had simply vanished. I looked down. The cliff dropped another 200 feet to a pile of broken rocks. If someone had fallen, I would have seen the body. But there was nothing down there except more of that strange skin blowing around in the wind. "Storm, this is Dave. I'm at the top. Where do you want me to set up the haul system?" I looked up. Dave was there at the cliff edge, waving down at me. He looked normal, sounded normal. But something in my gut said this wasn't right. "Dave, what's my middle name?" I called up to him. He laughed. "Come on, Storm. You're getting hypothermia. Let's get you out of there." "My middle name is Blackhorse, after my great-grandfather. Dave's known me for 8 years. He would have answered without hesitation. I started climbing back up my rope as fast as I could. By the time I reached the top, Dave was gone. My gear was still there, but the rescue truck I'd heard wasn't anywhere in sight. Just my Jeep, sitting alone in the parking area. I checked my radio. "Base, this is Storm. Where's Dave?" "Dave's still at the station, Storm. He never left." The hair on my neck stood up. "Then who was just up here talking to me?" Static. Then, "Storm, you're breaking up. Say again?" I tried the radio 3 more times but couldn't get through. The ice storm was getting worse and something told me I needed to get off this mountain fast. I packed my gear and started back down the trail. But every step felt wrong. The path didn't look the same as it had on the way up. Trees were in different places. Rocks I remembered were gone. And there were tracks in the snow that hadn't been there before. Human tracks, but wrong. The stride was too long, the depth uneven like the person mopped. Kingdom was sometimes walking on 2 legs, sometimes on 4. I followed the tracks for about half a mile before I realized they were following my own trail from earlier. Whatever made them had walked exactly where I'd walked, but in the opposite direction, like something had studied my tracks and copied them perfectly. That's when I saw the cabin. It was set back in the trees about 50 yards from the trail. Warm light glowed in the windows and smoke rose from the chimney. I'd been working this area for 18 years and had never seen a cabin here before. But my hands were getting numb and the wind was picking up. I needed shelter. I knocked on the door and heard footsteps inside. When it opened, I was looking at myself again. Same face, same clothes, same scar. But the eyes were wrong. Too yellow, like an animal's eyes reflecting light. "Come in, Storm," it said in my voice. "You look cold." I stepped back. "Who are you?" It smiled with my face. "I'm you, or I will be, once I finish wearing you in." That's when I saw the others inside the cabin. Dave was there, sitting by the fire. The woman in the red jacket from the cliff. The man in blue. All the dead climbers, all very much alive, and looking at me with those same yellow eyes. "We've been waiting," said the thing wearing Dave's face. "It's hard to hunt alone up here. But with your form, your memories, your job, we can bring so many more people to the mountain." I ran. Behind me I heard voices calling. My voice, Dave's voice, the voices of dead climbers, all of them saying the same thing. "Don't run, Storm. You can't get away. We know every trail you know. We've been watching you for years." I crashed through the forest, branches tearing at my clothes. My snowshoes caught on fallen logs and I went down hard twice. Each time I got up, the voices were closer. When I reached my Jeep, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine turned over on the third try, and I gunned it down the mountain road without looking back. But in my rearview mirror, I could see lights following me. Headlights from vehicles that couldn't possibly be there. The access road was blocked by fallen trees from the ice storm. Nothing should have been able to get through. I took the curves too fast, sliding on ice patches that nearly sent me over the guardrail. The lights stayed behind me, matching my speed perfectly. Every time I looked in the mirror, they were the same distance away. It wasn't until I reached the main highway that the lights disappeared. I drove straight to the ranger station and found Dave at his desk filling out paperwork. He looked up when I came in, and his eyes were normal, brown, not yellow. "Storm, you look like hell. How'd the rescue go?" I stared at him for a long moment. "Dave, what's my middle name?" "Black Horse. After your great-grandfather. Why?" Relief flooded through me. This was the real Dave. "I need to make a report," I said. "And I need you to call the state police. We've got 6 dead bodies on Devil's Backbone, and something up there is wearing their faces." Dave looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. The state police took 3 days to get up to Devil's Backbone. By then, the ice had melted and the weather had cleared. They found the 6 bodies exactly where I'd reported them, but according to their investigation, all 6 had died of hypothermia. No bite marks, no claw marks, no missing pieces. Sometimes extreme cold can cause hallucinations, the lead investigator told me. Combined with the stress of a difficult rescue, it's not uncommon for experienced personnel to see things that aren't there. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew it wasn't over. The proof came 2 weeks later when hikers started disappearing near Devil's Backbone, always in groups of 2 or 3, always during bad weather. The search teams would find their camps intact, gear undisturbed, like the people had just walked away on their tents in the middle of the night. I volunteered for every search. Each time we'd find the missing hikers in impossible places, hanging from cliff faces they couldn't have reached, frozen in positions that made no sense, and always with that look of terror frozen on their faces, like they'd seen something unbelievable right before they died. The 4th search was when I finally understood what we were dealing with. I was partnered with Dave and 2 state police officers. We'd been called out to find a family of 4, parents and 2 teenage kids, who'd been missing for 3 days near the backbone. We found their camp just after dawn. Tents zipped shut, food still hanging properly from bear cables, everything normal except the family was gone. That's when Dave started acting strange again. "I think I see tracks leading up to the ridge," he said. But when I looked where he was pointing, there was nothing there. "Dave, there's no tracks." He looked at me with those yellow eyes I remembered from the cabin. "Sure there are, Storm, right there." The state cops didn't notice anything wrong. They were city boys. Wouldn't have recognized a skinwalker if it bit them. But I'd grown up with my grandmother's stories. I knew the signs. I waited until we were separated from the others, then confronted him. "You're not Dave." It smiled with Dave's face. "I'm more Dave than Dave ever was. I have all his memories, all his skills. The only difference is, I'm hungry." "Where is he? The real Dave?" "Safe. We keep the originals alive as long as we need to study them. Dave's been teaching us about human behavior for weeks now." That's when I realized the truth. These things had been infiltrating the rescue teams for months. Every search, every recovery, they learned more about how we worked, how we thought, and they were using that knowledge to hunt more effectively. "How many of you are there?" "Enough. We've been preparing for winter. When the snow gets deep and the tourists stay away, we'll expand our territory. Maybe down into the valley. So many people to choose from. I reached for my radio to call the state cops, but Dave thing moved faster than any human could. It knocked the radio from my hand and grabbed me by the throat. Can't let you do that, Storm. You know too much. But don't worry. We'll take good care of your form. 18 years of mountain rescue experience will be very useful. I couldn't breathe. Dave's fingers, too long now with claws pushing through the fingertips, were crushing my windpipe. Black spots danced in my vision. That's when my grandmother's voice came back to me. All those stories she'd told me as a kid about the old ways, the protective rituals, the things that could drive away evil spirits. I still carried my great-grandfather's medicine pouch in my pack. I'd always thought it was just sentimental nonsense, but suddenly those old Cherokee words were the only hope I had. With my free hand, I reached for the sage bundle in the pouch. The Dave thing saw what I was doing and loosened its grip just enough for me to breathe. That old magic won't work on us, Storm. We're not spirits, we're something much worse. I managed to get my lighter out and set the sage smoking. The smell filled the air between us, and suddenly the thing wearing Dave's face started backing away. Impossible, it hissed. And now its voice was changing, becoming something that had never been human. I started chanting the words my grandmother had taught me, words I hadn't spoken in 30 years, but they came back like I'd said them yesterday. The protection chant, the one that drives away the things that steal faces. The Dave thing screamed, and its human mask started to slip. I could see the real face underneath, wolf-like but wrong, with too many teeth and eyes that burned yellow in the daylight. More shapes emerged from the forest. The missing family, but wearing those same yellow eyes. The state cops, but walking, on legs that bent the wrong way. All of them had shed their human masks and were showing their true forms. 7 skinwalkers, and one of me, with nothing but burning sage and half-remembered prayers. But my grandmother's magic worked. The smoke from the sage formed a barrier they couldn't cross. Every time one of them tried to get closer, it would scream and fall back. "This isn't over, Storm," said the lead creature in a voice like breaking bones. "We know where you live. We know everyone you care about. When the sage runs out, we'll be waiting." They melted back into the forest like shadows, and I was alone with the smoking sage and the knowledge that something much older and hungrier than I'd ever imagined was hunting in my mountains. I never found the real Dave or the missing family. The official report said they'd all fallen into a crevasse that rescue teams couldn't reach. Case closed, file sealed, everyone moved on. But I knew better. I put in for transfer the next week. Told them I needed a change of scenery after 18 years in the same place. Truth was, I couldn't stay knowing what was up there. Every missing hiker, every unexplained accident, every time someone disappeared in bad weather, I'd wonder if the skinwalkers had taken them. I keep my grandmother's medicine pouch with me now. Sage, sweetgrass, tobacco, and a piece of obsidian blessed by a medicine man. I burn sage in my house every night and scatter salt around the doors and windows. My new neighbors think I'm crazy, but I sleep better knowing there's protection around me. The nightmares still come, though. Dreams where I'm back on Devil's Backbone, rappelling down to bodies that turn their heads to watch me. Dreams where Dave calls my name from empty forest, and when I turn around, his face is melting off to show the wolf underneath. Sometimes I wonder if they're still up there wearing the thoughts, 'cause of the people they've taken, learning human ways, human weaknesses, growing bolder as they perfect their hunting techniques. I tried to warn other rangers about what I'd seen, but nobody wanted to hear it. Too many weird stories can ruin a career, and I'd already pushed the boundaries of what people would believe. So I'm telling you instead. If you're ever hiking in Virginia, especially around Jefferson National Forest, trust your instincts. If someone you know starts acting different after being alone in the woods, look at their eyes. If a familiar voice calls to you from somewhere it shouldn't be, don't follow it. And if you find yourself on Devil's Backbone Ridge when the weather turns bad, get out fast. The Cherokee knew about these things long before white men came to the mountains. They had words for them, rituals to protect against them, rules about where not to go when the spirits were hungry. We forgot those warnings, and people died for our ignorance. I'm 62 now, living in Arizona where the desert is too hot and dry for shapeshifters that prefer cold mountains and deep forests. But every winter I get letters from hikers' families asking if I know anything about their missing relatives, people who disappeared near Devil's Backbone and were never found. I write back and tell them what the investigators always say: hypothermia, falls, getting lost in bad weather, natural causes. But I also include a small bag of sage and instructions on how to burn it, just in case. Because somewhere in those Virginia mountains, things that should never have learned to walk upright are still hunting, still taking faces, still wearing human skin like clothes they can change whenever they want, and they remember the ranger who got away. My name is Jeremiah Stormcrow, and I've seen the devils that live on Devil's Backbone. Trust me, you don't want to meet them. My name is Isaiah Ghostwind, and I've been taking care of old places in the Allegheny National Forest for 24 years. Most folks think it's weird work spending your days in ghost towns and ruined buildings, but somebody has to keep track of history. These old logging camps and abandoned settlements tell stories about the people who lived here long before any of us were born. The locals around Kinzua Bridge always told strange tales. They said the dead loggers from the 1880s still worked their shifts, still cut trees that weren't there, still ran sawmills that hadn't operated in over 100 years. I never believed any of it. Dead is dead, and ghosts are just stories people tell to make boring places seem interesting. I should have listened. It was October 1995 when everything changed. The leaves were turning colors, and an early snow had started falling in the higher elevations. Thick fog rolled through the valleys like gray wool, making the forest feel cut off from the rest of the world. Perfect weather for the Historical Society folks who loved taking pictures of spooky old buildings. That's what they were doing when I found them. 7 members of the Pennsylvania Historical Society had driven up from Pittsburgh to photograph the abandoned sawmill near the collapsed railroad bridge. It was a beautiful spot, or at least it used to be. The old steam-powered mill sat in a clearing surrounded by rotting timber buildings and rusted equipment from the logging boom. Wild grass grew through the floorboards and saplings pushed up between the railroad ties. I found their cars first, parked neat as you please beside the access road. The engines were still warm. Their camera bags and notebooks lay scattered on the front seats like they'd just stepped out for a minute. But when I walked into that sawmill, I knew something was terribly wrong. All 7 of them stood perfectly still at different workstations throughout the building. They weren't moving, weren't breathing, weren't responding when I called out. Their skin had turned blue-white, like they'd been frozen solid. Ice crystals covered their clothes and hair. Their hands gripped tools that hadn't been there when I'd inspected the site just 2 weeks before: crosscut saws, cant hooks, and lumber measuring tools that looked exactly like the ones from the 1880s. The strangest part was their positions. Each person stood as if they were operating machinery. The woman near the main saw had her hands positioned like she was feeding logs into a blade. The man by the boiler stood ready to shovel coal into a firebox. They looked like they'd been working, but the machinery hadn't run for over a century. I checked my thermometer, 52 degrees, way too warm for anyone to freeze like that. I radioed for help, but the static was so bad I could barely get through to the base station. The fog seemed to muffle every sound except the drip of moisture from the roof beams and the creak of old wood settling. While I waited for the county coroner, I started documenting the scene with my camera, taking pictures for the official report. That's when I noticed something that made my hands shake. In every photograph, there were more people than I could see with my naked eye. Translucent figures stood beside each of the frozen victims, wearing old-fashioned work clothes and holding the same period tools. When I looked up from the camera viewfinder, I saw only the 7 frozen bodies. When I looked through the lens, I saw 14 people, 7 living people who had somehow frozen to death, and 7 others who definitely weren't alive. The coroner's team arrived just before sunset, grumbling about the difficult access road and the gathering darkness. Dr. Martinez, who'd been handling unusual deaths in the county for 15 years, took one look at the scene and started cursing in Spanish. "This doesn't make sense, Isaiah," she said, kneeling beside the closest victim. "Body temperature suggests they've been dead for hours, but rigor mortis should have set in by now. Instead, they're frozen solid in standing positions. I've never seen anything like it." I showed her the photographs, pointing out the extra figures that appeared in every frame. She squinted at the images, then looked around the empty sawmill. "Camera malfunction," she decided. "Double exposure or light reflecting off the fog. Happens all the time in old buildings with lots of windows and metal surfaces." But I'd been using the same Nikon F3 for 10 years. It had never malfunctioned before. While the team worked, I started going through the victims' belongings, looking for clues about what they might have been doing before they died. Their notebooks contained typical historical society research, sketches of the building layout, notes about architectural features, and measurements of the machinery. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. In the back of one notebook, someone had copied down what looked like employment records from the old Allegheny Lumber Company. Names, job titles, daily wages, and work assignments from 1887. The handwriting was fresh, like it had been written that morning. But the Allegheny Lumber Company had gone out of business in 1889 after a series of accidents killed most of their workforce. I compared the names on the list to the company records I kept in my files. They matched perfectly, right down to the men who had died when the main support beam collapsed in the sawmill, crushing 7 workers beneath tons of machinery and timber. The same number of people we'd just found, frozen. By the time the coroner's team finished their initial examination, full darkness had settled over the forest. The fog had grown thicker, reducing visibility to maybe 10 feet in any direction. As they loaded the bodies into the van, Dr. Martinez pulled me aside. "I want you to stay away from this place for a few days," she said. "There might be some kind of environmental hazard, carbon monoxide leak, toxic mold, something that could cause hallucinations and hypothermic conditions. I'm recommending the site be declared off-limits until we can get a full safety inspection." I nodded, but I knew she was wrong. I'd been working in old buildings for over 2 decades. I knew the signs of environmental hazards, and this wasn't one of them. After they left, I sat in my truck for a while, going through my files by flashlight. The original accident report from 1887 made for grim reading. 23 men had died that winter, some in the sawmill collapse, others in smaller accidents throughout the logging season. According to the records, many of the bodies had never been recovered from the wreckage. The company had simply abandoned the site and moved their operation further south. As I read, I became aware of sounds drifting through the fog. Metal on wood, the steady rhythm of saws cutting timber, the clang of tools being moved and positioned, the distant whistle of a steam engine building pressure. I turned off my flashlight and rolled down the window. The sounds grew clearer, definitely coming from the direction of the abandoned sawmill. I could hear men's voices calling out work instructions, the creak of wooden beams under strain, and the whoosh of steam being released from pressure valves. Someone was operating that sawmill. Against every instinct telling me to drive away, I grabbed my flashlight and headed back toward the building. The fog seemed to part as I walked, creating a clear path through what should have been impenetrable mist. The sounds grew louder with each step, not echoes or tricks of the wind, but the genuine noise of heavy industrial work. When I reached the sawmill, everything fell silent. I stood in the doorway, sweeping my flashlight beam across the interior. Empty. No people, no machinery running, no signs of recent activity. Just the same rotting floorboards and rusted equipment I'd seen 100 times before. But the air smelled different. Instead of the musty odor of decay and damp wood, I caught the sharp scent of fresh sawdust and machine oil. Coal smoke drifted in thin wisps near the old boiler, though the firebox had been cold for over a century. As I turned to leave, my flashlight beam swept across the main workstation where we'd found the first victim that morning. Fresh sawdust covered the floor in neat piles, and wood shavings curled around the base of the cutting station like they'd just been planned. I knelt down and touched the sawdust, still warm. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 7 frozen faces and the ghostly figures in my photographs. By morning, I'd convinced myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe some local kids were playing pranks. Maybe the Historical Society had been using period tools as props for their photographs. Maybe the sawdust had blown in from a working mill somewhere upwind. I drove back to the site just after sunrise, planning to do a thorough daylight inspection before the safety team arrived. The fog had lifted, and the forest looked normal again, just another abandoned logging camp slowly being reclaimed by nature. My colleague, Mike Ironwood, met me at the access road. Mike was a good man, 5 years younger than me, and built like the lumberjacks who used to work these mountains. He'd heard about the incident on the radio and wanted to help with the investigation. "Brought my metal detector," he said, patting the white lightning unit strapped to his back. "Figured we might find some clues in the debris around the building. Sometimes people drop things when they're startled or running away." We spent the morning going over every inch of the sawmill and the surrounding area. Mike's metal detector picked up the usual assortment of old nails, railroad spikes, and broken machinery parts, but nothing recent enough to explain what had happened to the Historical Society group. Around noon, while I was photographing some of the architectural details, Mike called out from near the old worker housing, "Isaiah, you need to see this." He was standing beside what looked like a freshly dug grave, though the ground had been covered with undisturbed forest debris just hours before. The earth was dark and loose, piled in a neat mound with a rough wooden cross at the head. "This wasn't here this morning," Mike said. "I'm sure of it. I swept this entire area with the detector." I knelt down and examined the cross. The wood looked old, weathered by decades of exposure, but the rope binding the pieces together was new. Someone had carved initials into the crossbeam, J.M., 1887 to 1887. Whoever J.M. was, he didn't live very long, Mike observed. I checked my records. James Morrison, age 19, hired as a sawyer in March 1887, killed in April when a falling tree crushed his spine. His body had never been recovered from the logging site. "Mike," I said slowly, "we need to leave. Right now." But when I looked up, Mike was gone. I called his name, searching the area around the grave, and then expanding my search through the entire campsite. His metal detector lay abandoned beside a pile of rusty metal fragments, still switched on and beeping steadily. His jacket hung from a nearby branch, as if he'd just taken it off for a moment. That's when I heard the sawmill starting up. The sound began as a low rumble, like a steam engine building pressure. Then came the distinctive whine of saw blades spinning up to cutting speed, followed by the rhythmic thud of logs being positioned and fed through the machinery. Men's voices called out over the noise, work orders and warnings in the professional shorthand of experienced sawyers. I ran toward the sawmill, calling Mike's name. The building looked the same from the outside, but light glowed from the windows and smoke poured from the chimney stack. The sounds of active lumber production echoed across the clearing, exactly the way it would have sounded during the 1880s logging boom. When I reached the doorway, I stopped cold. The sawmill was fully operational. Steam-powered equipment I'd only seen in historical photographs ran at full capacity. Logs moved along conveyor systems that fed into spinning blade assemblies. Workers in period clothing moved efficiently between stations, each man focused on his specific task in the lumber production process. And there was Mike, standing perfectly still at the main cutting station, his hands positioned to guide logs into the saw blade. His skin had the same blue-white color I'd seen on the Historical Society victims. Ice crystals covered his work clothes, and his eyes stared straight ahead without blinking. But the machinery around him was translucent, ghostly. I could see through the equipment to the rotting floorboards underneath. The workers moved like shadows, there, but not there. Solid enough to operate their tools, but transparent enough that I could see the forest through their bodies. One of the workers looked up at me and smiled. He was missing his left arm below the elbow, a common injury in 1880s logging operations. Despite his friendly expression, his eyes held a cold hunger that made my skin crawl. "You're late for your shift," he called out in a voice that sounded like wind through dry leaves. "We've been expecting you." He pointed to an empty workstation beside Mike's position. A set of period logging tools waited on the workbench. a crosscut saw, measuring square, and lumber marking gauge. All the equipment I would need to join their eternal workforce. Mike's a good worker, the ghost continued. Learns fast, doesn't complain about the cold or the hours. You'll fit right in. I backed away from the doorway, but more workers had appeared behind me. They emerged from the fog like photographs developing, becoming more, as solid as they approached. All of them showed the injuries that had killed them over a century ago. Crushed limbs, deep cuts from saw blades, and the flattened skulls of men who had died under falling timber. "The work never stops," said a man whose chest had been caved in by a log. "Company quotas have to be met. We're behind schedule after losing so many good people." I understood then what had happened to the Historical Society group, and what was happening to Mike. These weren't just ghosts haunting an old building. They were the spirits of workers who had died with unfulfilled contracts, trapped in an endless cycle of labor that could only be broken by recruiting replacements from the living. "I'm not a logger," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just here to preserve the historical site." The one-armed ghost laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Everyone's a logger here, friend. Once you sign on, you work until the job is finished, and this job will never be finished." The ghost workers closed in around me, their translucent forms becoming more solid with each step. I could feel the temperature dropping as they approached, the same impossible cold that had frozen the Historical Society members and trapped Mike in their endless workforce. My breath came out in white puffs as the air around me grew thick with supernatural cold. Ice began forming on my jacket sleeves and the metal parts of my equipment. In another few seconds, I'd be frozen just like the others, locked in position at some ghostly workstation for eternity. But 24 years of working in old buildings had taught me more than just historical preservation techniques. I knew the stories behind every site I maintained, including the business practices that had led to so many worker deaths in the 1880s. "Wait," I called out, fighting to keep my teeth from chattering. "You said something about company quotas and contracts. What company do you work for?" The one-armed ghost paused, his expression becoming uncertain. "Allegheny Lumber Company, of course. Best pay in the county, as long as you meet your daily targets." "The Allegheny Lumber Company went out of business in 1889, I said. "They violated their contracts when they abandoned the site after the sawmill collapse. Any employment agreements became void when the company dissolved." The ghostly workers looked at each other with confusion. For over a century, they'd been operating under the assumption that they were still bound by their original employment terms. But dead companies can't enforce contracts, and abandoned work sites have no legal standing for labor obligations. "That's not right," said the ghost with the crushed chest. "The foreman said we had to keep working until the spring lumber orders were filled. Company policy." I pulled out my files, hands shaking from the cold, and found the business dissolution papers I'd copied from the county records office. "Look for yourself," I said, holding up the documents. "Allegheny Lumber Company dissolved April 15, 1889, following investigation into unsafe working conditions and multiple worker fatalities. All contracts declared null and void." The papers seemed to glow in the dim light, and the ghost workers leaned in to read them. As they did, their forms began to waver and fade. The supernatural cold lessened, and I could hear the sawmill machinery winding down like a steam engine running out of pressure. "But the work," the one-armed ghost whispered, his voice growing fainter. "We have to finish the work." "The work was finished over 100 years ago," I said. "You've been trapped here by a company that broke its promises and abandoned you. Your contracts ended the day they walked away." One by one, the ghost workers began to disappear. Some looked relieved, finally free to rest after decades of pointless labor. Others seemed confused, unsure what came next after an eternity of following the same daily routine, the last. To fade was the ghost with the crushed chest, who had apparently been some kind of supervisor. "Tell them," he said, as his form dissolved into mist. "Tell them what happened to us. Tell them we were good workers who deserve better." As the ghosts vanished, the phantom sawmill equipment disappeared with them. The building returned to its normal state of decay, just rotting wood and rusted metal, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. The supernatural cold lifted, replaced by the normal October chill. Mike collapsed to his knees, gasping and shivering, but very much alive. The blue tint was already fading from his skin, and he looked around in confusion, as if waking up from a vivid dream. "Isaiah," he said, his voice hoarse. "What happened?" "I remember finding that grave, and then... nothing." "How long was I out?" "Not long," I lied, helping him to his feet. "You must have hit your head on something. Come on, let's get you back to the truck, where it's warm." As we walked away from the sawmill, I looked back once. The building stood empty and silent, just another abandoned structure slowly returning to the earth. But I swear I could still smell fresh sawdust in the air, and somewhere in the distance I heard the faint echo of a steam whistle signaling the end of a long shift. The official report blamed the deaths on an environmental hazard, probably a carbon monoxide leak from some underground source that had since dissipated. The Historical Society victims were buried with full honors, and their families received compensation from the state's Emergency Victim Fund. Mike recovered completely, though he never could remember exactly what had happened during those missing hours. I finished documenting the sawmill site and submitted my preservation recommendations to the Pennsylvania Historical Commission. They decided the building was too dangerous for public access and ordered it sealed off with warning signs and chain-link fencing. The official reason was structural instability, but I made sure to include detailed notes about the 1880s worker deaths in my final report. Someone needed to remember those men's names and tell their stories properly. But I couldn't keep working in historical preservation after that. Every abandoned building, every ghost town, every old industrial site made me wonder what other spirits might be trapped in endless cycles of unfinished business. I requested a transfer to modern facility management. Nice, clean office buildings where the worst supernatural activity you might encounter is a flickering fluorescent light. Mike stayed with historical preservation for a few more years, but he eventually moved on to wildlife management. He said he preferred working with living things that made sense, rather than trying to preserve places where the past refused to stay buried. The strange thing is, I started hearing similar stories from other preservation sites throughout the Allegheny region. Old mining camps where phantom equipment still operated during night shifts, abandoned steel mills where ghost workers tried to recruit visitors for dangerous jobs, even a few historical farms where spectral harvests continued decades after the last crops had been planted. It seems like the 1880s industrial boom left behind more than just buildings and machinery. It left behind the spirits of workers who had died with unfulfilled obligations, trapped in employment contracts that nobody had bothered to properly terminate. Men who had been so dedicated to their jobs that death couldn't make them quit. I sometimes wonder if I really helped those sawmill workers find peace, or if I just taught them a new way to justify their eternal labor. Maybe they moved on to whatever comes after death, or maybe they just found employment with a different company in some other abandoned workplace. Either way, I keep my business dissolution research up to date now. You never know when you might need to prove that a dead company can't fee or contract on living workers. And I always carry a copy of modern labor laws in my truck, just in case I meet some other spirits who don't know that the 40-hour work week was established in 1938, or that workplace safety regulations finally made it illegal for companies to treat their employees as expendable resources. Because the one thing I learned for certain in that haunted sawmill is that some jobs really never end, even after death. But sometimes, if you know the right paperwork to file, you can at least help the workers find a better union.